Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. 2 years ago, I rented a cabin in the mountains of Oregon so I could finish my dissertation. It was buried deep in the forest, maybe an hour's drive from the nearest gas station and small store. I'd found it listed through University Bulletin Board. Some professor's family owned it and barely used it. It was perfect for what I needed: isolation. No internet, no phone signal, no distractions. Just a small cabin with 2 floors, a fireplace, a kitchen with a gas stove, a few windows, and a little attic that I never really needed to go into. It was early spring, still cold in the evenings, and the nights felt long. The road up to the cabin was steep and full of switchbacks. I had to park at a clearing and hike the last 20 minutes with my gear on foot. The first week passed quietly. I'd get up around 7, drink instant coffee, and start typing until I couldn't stare at the screen anymore. The silence out there was thick. No hum of appliances, no cars. Just wind through the trees and the occasional bird. I slept early, read in the evenings by lantern light. The kind of place where you can hear your own heartbeat if you sit still long enough. I didn't see another person for that entire week. I liked that, or I thought I did. On the 7th night, just past 1 in the morning, I woke up to a noise. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp and specific. A scrape, like something dragging lightly across the outside wall. The cabin's bedroom was on the first floor, and the head of the bed was up against the outer wall that faced the forest. I lay still, listening. Nothing. I figured it might have been a branch moved by the wind, though it hadn't been windy earlier. I turned on my flashlight and sat up. The room looked normal. My boots were by the door. The backpack I'd brought was leaning against the wall, half unzipped. I stepped outside. Cold air hit me in the face. I aimed the flashlight around the perimeter of the cabin. The beam cut through the trees and caught a few glints off the dew-covered grass, but nothing out of place. I stood there for a few minutes, listening. The trees swayed, but the air was still. I went back inside and locked the door. I didn't sleep right away. I lay on my back, eyes open, flashlight still in my hand. About 10 minutes passed, and just as I was starting to drift again, I heard it. Another scrape. This time, it came from above. It was fainter, but higher up. I knew the sound of nails on wood, and this wasn't an animal. It moved with intent, slow, long drags, like someone deliberately scratching a plank with their fingernails. It slid from one side of the ceiling to the other, then stopped. My heart was pounding. I sat up again, barely breathing. Then I heard a dull thud. On the roof. Not loud, like something or someone had landed lightly or was shifting their weight. I stood frozen for a moment. Then I turned off my flashlight and walked slowly to the window, trying not to step on the creaky parts of the floor. I pulled back the curtain and looked out. The yard was empty. Trees surrounded the cabin on all sides, their trunks black against the faint silver light. I could just barely see the roof line from that angle, maybe the lower edge of it above the window frame, but not the top. I stood there, watching, listening, and then, unmistakably, I heard breathing. Not mine. A slow, steady exhale. It was above me. I turned and stared at the ceiling. The roof was steep, almost triangular. The attic was small and sat right above the bedroom. There was a wooden hatch in the hallway ceiling that led to it. I'd noticed it the day I arrived, but hadn't paid much attention. Now I couldn't take my eyes off it. I stepped into the hall, flashlight back in my hand, and craned my neck up toward the hatch. It was a simple square with a pull string. I didn't pull it. Instead, I stepped up onto a chair and pressed my ear to the wood. The breathing got louder. Close. It wasn't hurried. It was steady, like someone sitting quietly in the dark. My skin crawled. I climbed down, grabbed my coat and flashlight, and opened the front door. I didn't think. I just moved. My boots weren't even fully laced. I stepped outside and walked backward, the flashlight beam jumping and shaking. I kept the light on the roof line, angling it as best I could through the trees. Then I saw him. A man, crouched on the peak of the roof, facing away from me. He wasn't moving. His back was hunched, knees drawn to his chest, arms wrapped around his shins, like some kind of statue or gargoyle, just sitting there, balanced perfectly at the roof's highest point. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, not breathing. Then I shouted. He didn't react. Not a twitch. I stood frozen. I didn't want to get closer, but I couldn't look away either. I kept my light trained on him, but it was too dark to make out his face. Just the shape of his body and the outline of what looked like long, unkempt hair. He looked thin. After a few more seconds, I turned and walked fast down the trail, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly over rocks and dirt. I nearly fell twice. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I drove down that mountain in the dark, tires skidding on turns, not caring. I made it to town before sunrise and slept in the back seat in the parking lot of a diner. When the diner opened, I used their landline to call the police. I gave them directions to the cabin as best I could. A pair of deputies met me later that morning, and we drove up together. I didn't go inside when we got there. I stood by the car while they checked the cabin and the surrounding area. They didn't find him, but they did find evidence. Climbing hooks jammed into the side of the cabin, professional grade, hammered deep into the wood near the back corner. Scratches along the siding. Boot prints on the roof. Dirty ones. The attic hatch had been opened. They said there were signs that someone had been up there recently. Disturbed dust, a blanket shoved in the corner, a plastic bottle half full of water. But no one matching the man I described was ever found. The deputies took my statement and told me it was likely someone living off-grid, maybe squatting, maybe unstable. They said it happens more than people think out there. I didn't go back to that cabin. I grabbed my laptop and bag and drove straight home that same day. I still don't know how long he'd been up there. Maybe just that night. Maybe longer. I moved in with my brother for a few months after that. Every noise at night made me flinch. I finished my dissertation from his spare room. I haven't gone back to the woods since. Not even a hike. I still dream about that man sometimes. The way he sat there on the roof, motionless, almost patient, like he was waiting. I rented the cabin because I needed to be away from people. Work had been eating me alive for over a year, and when I finally snapped at someone in the office, I knew it was time. I found this place online, some bare-bones listing with 3 grainy photos and a description that just said, secluded cabin, hillside, no neighbors, solar power, wood stove, bring supplies. It was way up in the northern woods, about 6 hours from where I lived. The road there turned to gravel, then dirt, then finally nothing at all but a rutted path barely wide enough for my car. I had to park off the trail and carry my stuff the last 100 yards. I didn't see another soul once I left the highway. The cabin sat on a steep slope, thick trees rising behind it and falling away in front. No lawn, no driveway, just forest. The ground was littered with dry pine needles and dead branches, and I had to watch my footing. The air was sharp with that clean, damp smell you get deep in the woods. The cabin was smaller than I thought it'd be. Just a single room with a wood stove in one corner, a small bed, and a table with 2 chairs. There was a pump out back for water and a composting toilet in a shed about 20 yards into the trees. No cell service, no Wi-Fi. That was the idea. I unpacked and set up my food, mostly canned stuff and dry goods. I brought a rifle, not for hunting, but because the guy who rented me the place mentioned bears. I wasn't worried, but it made me feel better. The first day passed quietly. I spent most of it walking around the area, trying to get a sense of the place. There wasn't much, just endless trees, rocks, the sound of birds and wind. I slept well that night with the stove going and the cool air coming in from the cracked window. The second day was when I started noticing small things. Nothing dramatic, just little things that made me pause. Like how the trail I'd walked the day before had a branch across it that hadn't been there. Or how the pump handle felt warmer than the air around it, like it had been used recently. I told myself it was animals, or maybe just my nerves. I'd been so wired before the trip that it made sense I'd need time to adjust. I spent that day chopping some kindling, stacking wood, and trying to read. The silence got to me after a while. It wasn't like the kind of quiet in a house. It was deep, no hum from appliances, no cars in the distance, just wind and the occasional creak of the trees. That night, I kept the rifle closer to the bed. I felt stupid for doing it, but I did it anyway. On the third morning, I found something behind the outhouse. It was early, barely light, and I'd stepped out to use the toilet. The pine needles were slick with dew, and everything looked gray and damp. As I walked back to the cabin, I noticed marks in the dirt. Footprints, but not boots or shoes, bare feet. Human, not animal. The prints were smudged and shallow, but they were definitely made by someone barefoot, and they led around the back of the cabin and into the trees. I stood there a long time. I wasn't even breathing. Then I turned slowly and followed the prints a little way into the woods, just far enough to see where they disappeared into the underbrush. No trail, no sign of anyone living nearby. Just empty woods. I backed away and went inside. Locked the door, even though I knew that wouldn't stop anyone determined. The rifle stayed next to me all day. I didn't go back outside except to piss just off the porch. That night was worse. I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to make it obvious someone was inside. I lay in bed with my boots on, listening. At one point, maybe around 2 a.m, I thought I heard movement outside. Not animals, too steady, like footsteps, crunching slowly through the needles. I stayed dead still, barely even blinking. It stopped eventually. I never looked out the window. I didn't want to know. When the sun came up, I packed. I didn't eat. I didn't clean up. I just shoved everything into bags and grabbed the rifle. I took one last look at the edge of the trees before I started hiking back to the car. I kept checking over my shoulder the whole time. Nothing, just forest. I got to the car and found it unlocked. I always locked it, even out there. Nothing was missing, but the driver's seat was pushed back a few inches, like someone taller than me had sat there. That detail sat in my chest like a brick. I started the engine and drove. Didn't stop until I hit pavement again. I didn't call the cops. I didn't tell the guy who rented the cabin. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. What was I going to say? That I saw some footprints? That I heard something walking at night? It all sounds weak when you say it out loud, but I know what I felt. That place wasn't empty. Weeks passed before I felt normal again. I kept checking the locks in my apartment, kept glancing out the window at night. I dream about the woods sometimes, but not like nightmares, just cold, quiet dreams where I couldn't move and something was always just out of view. A few months later, I got curious. I looked up the area online again, tried to find other listings or reviews of the cabin. I couldn't find the original listing. The site it had been on didn't have anything close. I checked satellite maps and thought I found the clearing, but it didn't show any sign of a building. Just trees. I even drove back toward the area once, thinking I might go find it again in daylight, just to prove to myself that it was still there. But I couldn't even find a trail. Everything looked different, like it had grown over, or maybe I'd imagined the whole place. But I didn't. I remember how the floor creaked when I stepped near the stove. I remember how the sunlight came through the one window in the late afternoon. I remember the bare footprints behind the outhouse, the ones that led into the woods and didn't come back out. I still have the rifle. I keep it in the closet. I haven't gone camping since. I've thought about it, sure, but something always stops me. Sometimes I'll wake up at night and my heart's pounding and I won't know why. I'll lie there listening, just like I did in that cabin, waiting for a sound that never comes. But the worst part is knowing that someone was out there, watching, walking barefoot through the woods in the middle of nowhere. They never tried to talk. They never showed themselves. They just wanted me to know they were there. And maybe that was the point. Not to hurt me, not to steal, just to remind me how alone I really was out there. How close they could get without me noticing. How little I could do to stop them if they wanted to. I think about that sometimes. How easy it was for them. How easy it still would be. I worked at a summer camp in North Georgia for a few years back in the early 2000s. We took kids on overnight hikes and did long sections of the Appalachian Trail near Dahlonega. That area, if you don't know, is right near the beginning of the trail, and it also happens to be a place where the Army Rangers train. You'd sometimes see signs posted on trees warning about military exercises or low-flying helicopters, but it was never a big deal. The camp had a system, and we followed it. Still, there was always this quiet understanding among the counselors that you stayed alert when hiking out there. It wasn't superstition, it was just common sense. This particular story happened about 15 years ago. I was in my early 20s, and it was my second summer at the camp. We were leading a small group of kids, middle schoolers, on a 3-night backpacking trip. It was hot, early July, real muggy days and cooler nights. That week we were out near Blood Mountain, though a few miles off the usual trail traffic. The counselors had picked a lesser-known site not far from a fire road. It was flat, quiet, and had a stream nearby. We liked it because it was easier to spread out, and the kids could feel like they were really in the wild. There were 3 counselors on that trip. Me, a guy named Evan, and a girl named Kayla. She was a junior in college at the time, tall, blonde, outdoorsy. She was good with the kids and didn't scare easy. We took turns doing gear checks, boiling water, running the meals. The kids were in their tents by 9 p.m., and by 10, the 3 of us had rolled out our sleeping bags on a tarp, maybe 20 yards from them. We cowboy camped, just laying on top of the tarp under stars. It's something we did often, less of a hassle than tents, and the air was cooler on your face. We never had issues before. That night was clear and quiet. You could hear some frogs and insects, but it wasn't too loud. I remember I fell asleep fast, like I always did out there. I was tired from hiking and loading packs all day. We all were. I woke up just after sunrise. The light through the trees was soft and gold, the kind that makes you blink a few times and feel disoriented. I sat up and stretched. Evan was already up, sitting on a rock, tying his boots. The kids were still quiet in their tents. Then I heard Kayla say, real calm but weird, "Hey, what the hell is this?" She was lying on her side, facing away from us, still half in her sleeping bag. I walked over to where she was and saw it immediately. Right next to her head, maybe 6 inches from her face, a long black combat knife was stabbed into the dirt. The kind with the serrated edge. Clean, shiny. Tied around the handle with a strip of paracord was a folded piece of paper. She didn't touch it. Neither did I. Evan walked over and crouched down, looked at it, then gently pulled the paper off. He opened it and read it. His face didn't change, but I could see the color drain out of his neck. He passed it to me. It said, in simple handwriting, no smudges or tears. "We could have killed you last night. Zoxo, the Army Rangers." That's it. I still remember how quiet the forest felt right then. Not peaceful, but heavy, like all the air got sucked out of the woods. Kayla was just staring at the knife. Evan stood up and started looking around slowly, scanning the trees. I did the same, but there was nothing to see, just trunks and light, like any other morning. We didn't say much. We all knew that someone had come into our camp, got close enough to lean over and stab a knife into the dirt right next to Kayla's face, and none of us had stirred. They didn't take anything. They didn't mess with the kids. Just that knife and that note. Kayla finally stood up. Her face was pale, her hands shaking a little. She kept rubbing her neck like someone had touched her. We started packing up right away, quietly but quickly. The kids were still asleep, which helped. We didn't want to scare them. We didn't even discuss staying another night. It wasn't a question. We got them up, had them eat some bars for breakfast, and said we were heading back a day early due to incoming weather. It was a lie, but believable. They were disappointed, but we kept things moving. As we hiked out, we kept glancing over our shoulders. Every now and then I swore I heard something move just out of sight, but it could have been squirrels or our own paranoia. Still, I never felt easy. The whole hike out, I felt watched. We made it back to the van by mid-afternoon. Kayla sat up front with me and didn't say a word the whole ride back. Evan sat with the kids and kept them laughing and singing camp songs, which honestly helped keep things normal. When we got back to the main camp, we pulled the camp director aside. We didn't make a scene. We just told him exactly what happened. At first, he looked like he didn't believe us. Then we showed him the note. He read it twice and set it down real slow. He said he was going to report it to the Forest Service and contact some military liaison office. Said it might have been some off-duty guys messing around, but it wasn't acceptable. He told us not to talk about it to the other counselors or kids. Not because he was trying to hide it, but because he didn't want rumors spreading or people panicking. Nothing ever came of the report, as far as I know. We never got a follow-up. No one ever owned up to it. But the director quietly pulled all our future overnight trips away from that part of the trail. We started going more southward after that, closer to Amicalola Falls and some of the better patrolled spots. That was the last year Kayla worked there. She finished the season but didn't come back. I didn't blame her. For me, I kept going back a couple more summers, but I never cowboy camped again. Not once. I always pitched a tent and zipped it shut, even in perfect weather. Sometimes I think about that night. Not in a spooky way, but in a cold, practical way. Someone trained, someone who knew how to move without being heard, came into our camp. They could have done anything they wanted. They didn't, but they wanted us to know they could have. That note wasn't a joke. It wasn't some kid playing soldier. It was a message, a very direct one. We were in their training ground, and they let us know. I rented this Airbnb in Northern California last summer. I had some time off from work, and I wanted a break from the city. I didn't want to do anything fancy, just a quiet, affordable place somewhere green where I could read, cook my own meals, maybe go for walks. I found this cabin that looked decent. It was a little outdated, but clean, and the price was low. Way lower than anything else nearby. The host had good reviews, too. His name was Ken. All the reviews mentioned he was quiet but helpful and respectful of space. I thought that sounded perfect. The drive up there was peaceful. Forest roads, pine trees everywhere. The GPS lost signal about 20 minutes before I got there, so I had to rely on the host's written directions. They were accurate, but it still felt like I was going deeper into nowhere. The driveway was just a dirt road, unpaved and full of potholes. The house wasn't really a cabin. It was more like a small ranch-style home with a tin roof and one porch light on. I parked, got out, and right away saw him standing on the porch. Ken looked like he was in his 60s. He had gray hair, longish, and a thick mustache. His clothes were stained, faded jeans, and a white t-shirt that had yellowing around the neck. He didn't say anything when I pulled up. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching me like he didn't know who I was. I waved, kind of unsure, and after a few seconds he nodded once and turned around, walking back inside. A few moments later, the front door opened again, and he gestured for me to come in. The inside of the house smelled like old wood and mildew. The kitchen and living room were combined into one big open space. There was a hallway leading to what I assumed was the bathroom and bedroom. Ken said in the listing that he lived on the property, but not in the same building. That was the part that threw me a little. I looked around and didn't see any other structure outside besides a half-collapsed shed-out back. When I asked if everything was self-check-in, the listing said yes, but I figured maybe he just wanted to hand off the key. He gave me a metal key on a bent keyring and pointed toward the back of the house. The guest space, as he called it, was an addition built onto the main house with its own door. It had a small bed, a dresser, and a folding table with a chair. No TV. The walls were wood paneling, and the air smelled like mothballs. It wasn't great, but I didn't mind. I dropped my bags and went to use the bathroom, which was technically still part of the main house. That's when I noticed the door between his part of the house and mine had no lock on it. None at all. Not even a knob. Just a handle that turned freely. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was overthinking it. I had a book, my laptop, and some frozen meals. I'd be fine for 3 nights. I just wanted quiet. The first night was uneventful. I made some pasta, read for a couple hours, and went to bed early. I thought I heard creaking outside the room a few times, but again, old houses do that. I try not to be paranoid. The second day was when things started to feel off. I went out for a walk down the dirt road around noon. I was gone maybe an hour and a half. When I got back, something felt different. I walked into the room and immediately noticed that the window over the bed was unlocked. I was 100% sure I had locked it when I left. I even remembered checking it. I told myself maybe I was remembering wrong, or maybe the window didn't latch all the way. Later that evening, I went to get something from my backpack, my charger, I think, and I saw that the front zipper compartment was open. Not wide open, but enough that it was clear someone had opened it. I hadn't used that pocket at all. Inside, nothing was missing, but everything had been moved around like someone had gone through it and then tried to make it look like they hadn't. I sat on the bed and just stared at the door for a long time. That door with no lock. I thought about leaving, but it was already getting dark and I didn't feel like driving through the forest at night. I decided I'd leave first thing in the morning. Just 2 nights instead of 3. I felt tense, but I tried to act normal just in case someone was watching me. That night, I pushed a chair under the door handle and stacked my suitcase against it. I figured if someone tried to come in, I'd at least hear them. I went to bed around 10 p.m. I had a hard time falling asleep, kept listening for sounds. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up around 2 a.m. to the faint sound of floorboards creaking. Not outside, inside. I sat up, heart pounding. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I listened hard. It was definitely inside the house, slow, careful steps. They stopped right outside my door. I reached over and grabbed my phone, but of course I had no signal. No Wi-Fi either. I sat in the dark for at least 10 minutes, just waiting. The steps never continued. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I got up and turned the lamp on. The hallway outside the door was empty. My chair and suitcase were still pushed up against the door. It hadn't opened, but I was sure someone had walked right up to it. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the chair until the sky started to turn blue, then packed everything and got out of there before 6 a.m. I left the key on the table and didn't even try to find Ken. I just got in my car and drove. But I didn't go straight home. I drove about 40 minutes to a town with a coffee shop. I needed to be around people. I ordered a coffee and sat in the corner and finally pulled out my phone. I had signal again. I opened the Airbnb app and started to write a message to the support team. While I was typing, I remembered something. On the first night, I saw a door at the far end of the hallway that looked like it led to a basement or maybe the back of the house. I hadn't thought much of it, but now that I was thinking back, I realized there was a small camera mounted above that door, facing toward the hallway. I thought it might have been a smoke detector at first, but it had a tiny red light on it. Out of curiosity, I went back to the listing and looked at the photos again. There was no camera shown in the pictures. And when I checked the reviews more carefully, I realized all the recent reviews were at least a year old. All the good ones that said he was respectful were from long ago. The last review was 14 months back. No new ones. No updates. That felt strange to me. I contacted Airbnb support and reported everything. I told them about the unlocked window, the bag being searched, the footsteps, the camera, and the missing lock on the inside door. They said they'd investigate. I asked if they could tell me if the listing was still active later, but they said they couldn't share that kind of detail. A few weeks later, out of curiosity, I checked again. The listing was gone, completely removed. I Googled the address and tried to find any other rentals by the same guy. Nothing came up. It was like it had never existed. I don't know what his deal was. I don't know if he was just creepy or if he was planning something worse. I've thought about it a lot. Maybe he just liked watching people. Maybe he was waiting for someone who wouldn't notice the small things. Maybe if I hadn't put the chair against the door, it would have opened that night. I don't use Airbnb anymore. Not unless it's a place with tons of recent reviews and a clearly professional host. I stick to hotels now. I don't care if it costs more. I want a front desk, other guests, cameras in the lobby, not hidden in the hallway. I want someone to hear me if I scream. I booked the place a few weeks in advance. It was supposed to be a small studio Airbnb just outside a quiet town in Northern California. I was driving up the coast alone, trying to take a break from everything. Work had been draining, my apartment felt claustrophobic, and I needed space. So I planned a solo trip. I chose somewhere peaceful and remote, but not too far from civilization. I didn't want total isolation, just quiet. The photos on the Airbnb listing showed a cozy studio with white walls, a small kitchen, and a forest view through big windows. It was part of a guest house behind a larger home, separated by a gravel driveway. The host, someone named Erin, had great reviews. People said she was helpful, but gave you your space. I didn't plan to meet her anyway. I just wanted to be alone for a few days. I drove up on a Wednesday. The sun was low by the time I pulled off the main road and followed my GPS down a winding, tree-lined street. The houses thinned out as I went further. Then I saw it, an old wooden gate hanging crooked on its hinges, with a long driveway disappearing into the trees. The GPS pinged. "You've arrived." I double-checked the address. It matched. I turned in and slowly drove up. The house at the end of the drive didn't look exactly like the one in the listing. It was similar, same general shape, same faded green paint, but something felt off. It looked older, more worn down. The siding was cracked in places. A few windows were boarded up. I wondered if I had the wrong spot, but there was a small guest house behind it, just like in the listing. The studio. No cars were parked out front. No lights on in the main house. I sat in my car for a minute, engine idling, thinking. I pulled up the Airbnb app and checked the address again. Same one. The guest house had a small sign on the door with the number 14A, the unit I'd booked. That settled it. I figured maybe the photos were a little old. People sometimes cleaned up for pictures and let things go afterward. I grabbed my bag and walked up. The lockbox was hanging next to the door, just like the check-in instructions said. I entered the code, opened it, and pulled out a single key. The door opened with a stiff creak. Inside was cold. The place was darker than I expected, like the windows hadn't been cleaned in years. Dust floated in the air. The furniture was mismatched and old. Not vintage, just worn out. A small couch, a chipped table, a twin bed in the corner. The fridge was humming, but the bulb inside had burned out. There was a faint smell like damp wood or mildew. I started feeling uneasy, like something wasn't right. Still, I was tired from the drive. I unpacked a little, washed my face in the tiny bathroom sink, and lay down. The bed creaked when I moved. The sheets felt cold and slightly damp, like they hadn't been used in a while. I kept telling myself it was just a rustic place. Not everyone updates their listings all the time. Not everyone cleans like a hotel. I'd be fine. It was just a few nights. That first night, I couldn't sleep well. I kept waking up to little noises. Creaks, thumps, a soft rattling from somewhere near the kitchen. I told myself it was the old building settling, maybe raccoons or something outside. I had my phone on me, but no signal. I tried connecting to the Wi-Fi, but it didn't work. I gave up and tried to go back to sleep. The next morning, I made some coffee and walked outside to clear my head. The main house looked even more run down in the daylight. Shutters falling off, roof sagging. I noticed something strange. There were deep grooves in the dirt near the side of the house, like something had been dragged. I stepped closer, but couldn't make sense of it. Probably some equipment or logs. Still, it made me uneasy. Back inside, I tried texting a friend, but nothing went through. I figured I'd drive into town later and get some signal. Around noon, I heard something, a door shutting. I looked out the window, but didn't see anyone. Then, faint footsteps on gravel. Slow. I stood still, listening hard. Nothing, just the wind. I walked to the door and opened a crack. Nobody was there. I walked around the side of the guest house. Still no one. I spent most of the afternoon sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. I couldn't relax. Something about the place just felt wrong. Like it was abandoned, but not empty. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was nearby. That evening, I decided to drive into town. I needed to get out of there for a while, just feel normal. But when I got to my car, I found something that made my stomach turn. A piece of duct tape was stuck to the rear window. Not big, just a small strip near the corner. I hadn't noticed it before. I pulled it off, heart racing, and looked around. Still no one. The driveway was quiet. I got in and drove fast. I parked near a gas station, pulled out my phone, and finally got a signal. I looked up the Airbnb listing again. Same address, same photos. I checked the host profile and tapped on the contact button, but it was gone. The listing had disappeared, like it had been deleted. Now I was really panicking. I checked my email. The confirmation was there, the address, the unit number. Everything matched, but when I searched Airbnb again, the property didn't show up. I tried calling the customer support number. I was on hold for a long time. When someone finally answered, I explained everything, step by step. They asked for the listing ID, which I read off from my email. There was silence on the line for a bit. Then the support rep said that listing had been removed a few days ago because of a policy violation. She didn't have the details, just that it was taken down for safety reasons. She asked if I was still at the property. I told her no, I was in town. She said to stay in town and not return to the house. That someone would follow up soon. Then she hung up. I just sat there in the car, staring at the screen. The whole situation started to click into place. The weird condition of the house, the noise at night, the duct tape, the listing being deleted. I realized I might not have even stayed in the right unit. Or worse, I had stayed in the right one, but it had been taken off the site for a serious reason, and I'd shown up before Airbnb could notify me. I didn't go back. I booked a motel in town. It was nothing special, just a standard chain with buzzing lights and stale air. But I slept better than I had the night before. I kept checking my email every hour, waiting to hear something. The next afternoon, I got a call from a different Airbnb rep. They apologized for the confusion and said the host had been suspended for multiple violations, including failing to maintain safe conditions. They refunded me and gave me a voucher for future use. That was it. No explanation about what those violations were. No confirmation about whether anyone had been there while I was. No mention of the duct tape or the noises. Just a refund and a line about we're taking the matter seriously. I haven't used Airbnb since, and sometimes I still wonder about the sounds I heard, about the shape I thought I saw through the frosted glass that first night, about the listing being live for just long enough for me to book it, then gone before I even arrived. If I had shown up a day later, maybe it wouldn't have been there at all, or maybe someone else would have, and maybe they wouldn't have made it into town. This happened about 7 years ago, back when I was in my final summer as a camper in my overnight camp in New England. I've been going to this camp for years, and by then, I knew every trail, every cabin, every tradition. That year felt like a big deal. Me and the other returning last year campers all wanted to make the most of it. You kind of feel invincible at that age, 16, 17, old enough to think you know everything, still young enough to be completely stupid. Part of our camp's routine was the overnight. Basically, each cabin got sent off to a separate site somewhere on camp property for a night under the stars. It was supposed to be one of those experiences where you learn how to build a fire, cook your own dinner, tell some scary stories, bond, and then hike back in the morning. That year, our overnight was set up as a joint trip with another cabin, all guys our age. The site was about 2.5 miles away, at the top of a massive hill. We used to call it Bald Top because the summit was just flat rock, open to the sky, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. From up there, you could see tree tops stretching all the way to the other side of the lake. It was beautiful, yeah, but also a little eerie, especially as it got dark. There was nothing up there. No cell signal, no buildings, no lights, just us, our tents, a fire pit, and woods in every direction. That summer, our whole age group had been fixated on this idea of townies. These were the people who lived in the small towns that bordered the camp's property. The camp actually owned a huge chunk of land around the lake, so we never really saw anyone from outside. But it was kind of this creepy half joke that we had. What if some weird townies came sneaking into camp one night? What if they watched us from the woods? Broke into a cabin? We knew it was dumb, but that didn't stop us from talking about it. Some of the younger counselors played along with it too, especially after dark, which probably didn't help. The hike up to Bald Top wasn't bad, just long. We carried our sleeping bags, tents, food, and whatever else we needed in big packs, and got there around late afternoon. We set up just before sunset. The counselors helped us start a fire, and we cooked some hot dogs in foil packs with potatoes and onions and stuff. Everyone was in a good mood. We told a few stories, talked about how this was our last overnight as campers, and watched the stars come out. The whole hilltop got really quiet after dark. You could hear the crackle of the fire, the buzzing of insects, and not much else. Sometime after we'd started to get into our tents, a few guys said they were hearing things. Not just animal noises, but actual footsteps or voices in the trees. I didn't hear anything myself, but once one or two people say they heard something, suddenly everyone's on edge. A couple kids came out of their tents saying they thought someone was out there. Some said they saw shadows moving behind the tree line. It wasn't panic exactly, but there was a definite sense of something not being right. The counselors tried to calm us down. They said it was just animals or the wind. They told us the usual stuff. This is private property. No one ever comes out here. We're totally safe. But it didn't work. Too many kids were scared. So two of the counselors, Joe and Thomas, volunteered to go check it out. Joe was this big guy, tall, really athletic, looked like he could probably bench press a small tree. Thomas was more average looking, but he was calm and responsible. Everyone liked him. They told us they were going to walk a short perimeter through the trees, just to be sure there was nothing going on. They took one of the walkie-talkies and disappeared into the woods. The rest of us sat around the dying fire, trying to act like we weren't all staring at the trees, listening for something. It was quiet for a while, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Then we heard it. It started with Joe's voice, loud and angry, cutting through the trees. He wasn't yelling exactly, but he was speaking forcefully, like he was confronting someone. He was saying things like, "You can't be here. This is private property. We have a walkie. If you don't leave, we're calling the police." The second I heard that, my stomach dropped. It didn't sound like a joke. And this wasn't a story anymore. Everyone froze. Then came this loud bang, like something heavy hitting something else. Right after that, there was this scream. High-pitched, sharp, like someone had been seriously hurt. It didn't sound fake. It sounded like panic. Then Joe came sprinting out of the trees, face pale and wild-eyed. He pointed back toward the woods and yelled something like, "Get the kids out of here now," and turned back around, vanishing into the trees again. Total chaos broke out. One of the other counselors grabbed a couple of steak knives we'd used for cooking and ran in after him. The rest of us? We just ran. Most of us weren't even dressed properly. Some kids were barefoot. A lot of us were just in boxers or shorts. We were tearing down that rocky hill in the dark, half-blind, tripping over roots, scraping legs on branches. Kids were crying. I remember one guy behind me kept muttering prayers under his breath. A few tried to grab sticks or rocks like they were going to fight off someone in the woods. I was just focused on not falling and trying to stay with the group. I remember how sharp the air felt on my chest, how the cold sweat stuck to my back. I remember the way my heart was beating so fast I thought I might actually throw up. My legs were shaking as I ran, but I didn't stop. None of us did. It was pure adrenaline. We were maybe halfway down the hill, stumbling through the trees and trying to stick together, when we saw flashlights bobbing toward us. It was Joe, Thomas, and the counselor who had run in after them. They were laughing. Not just laughing, they were bent over, hands on knees, out of breath from how hard they were laughing. That's when it hit us. They made the whole thing up. Turns out, Joe and Thomas had decided to play into the whole townie thing as a prank. They didn't tell the third counselor. That bang and scream? Joe had kicked a log or something and screamed as loud as he could. Then he ran back, told us to flee, and turned around to rescue Thomas. The plan was just to scare us a bit, not cause full-blown hysteria. But since they didn't tell the other counselor, he believed it. And because we trusted him, we believed it. It spiraled way out of control. No one said much right then. Some kids were furious. Others were just too exhausted and shaken up to even react. We all sat down right there on the trail and tried to catch our breath. My legs were covered in scratches, and one guy had twisted his ankle pretty bad. It took us a while to hike back up and collect our stuff in the dark. We didn't even finish the overnight. The counselors ended up walking us all the way back to the main camp in the middle of the night. The next morning, the camp director was waiting for us. Joe and Thomas got reamed out. Word spread fast, and pretty soon every kid at camp was talking about what happened. After that, the camp made a new rule. Counselors were no longer allowed to scare campers. No pranks, no fake stories, nothing. They said it was for safety reasons, but everyone knew it was because of us. Looking back on it now, I can laugh. A little, but in that moment, that night, it was the most terrified I've ever been in my life. No movie or ghost story ever came close. And even though we were never really in danger, that fear was real. The panic was real. That night is still burned into my brain, every second of it. And I think if you asked any of the other guys who were there, they'd say the same. I stayed at my uncle's cabin in the summer of 2016. It was in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in northern Pennsylvania. I hadn't been up there since I was a kid, but I remembered it being peaceful, quiet, surrounded by forest on all sides, the closest neighbor probably a mile or two away. After a rough semester at school and a bad breakup, I needed some time alone. When I got the email from my uncle saying the cabin was available and I could use it for a week, it felt like perfect timing. He sent me an address, a short note with some basic instructions, and said he'd leave the key under the fake rock near the porch steps. I didn't question it. When I got there, the place looked exactly how I remembered. Plain wooden exterior, chipped paint on the porch railings, a rusted wind chime hanging above the door. I walked in, and it smelled like old wood, like a mix of pine and dust. The furniture was still the same. Old green plaid couch, a wood stove in the corner, a little kitchen with a tiny fridge and stove that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. There was no cell service, no internet. That was part of the appeal, though. I just wanted to read, hike, and sleep in late. There was a narrow hallway with 3 doors, a bathroom, a bedroom, and a door at the very end that had always been locked. As a kid, I remember asking my uncle what was behind that door, and he always said it was just storage. I didn't think about it much then. On the first day, I didn't even check it. I just settled in, unpacked my stuff, made a sandwich, and spent the afternoon sitting out on the porch with a book, listening to the wind through the trees. It was the second morning when things started to feel off. I woke up and found the basement door slightly open. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I stood in the hallway for a few seconds, staring at the door like it might shut on its own. It was one of those thin, hollow wood doors with a simple brass knob. I walked over and opened it slowly. It creaked, loud and sharp. There was a narrow staircase leading down, unlit, with the smell of cold concrete and mildew coming up from below. I flipped a light switch just inside the door, and a single bulb at the bottom came on, casting a weak yellow glow. I stood at the top of the stairs for a long time. I wasn't scared exactly. I was just curious, maybe a little hesitant. But eventually, I started down the stairs. They were steep, creaky, and the air got colder with each step. When I reached the bottom, I saw what looked like an old workshop. Dust covered everything: tools, shelves, cardboard boxes, some fishing gear, old paint cans. Cobwebs in the corners, a rolled-up tent leaning against the wall. Nothing strange, nothing worth locking up for decades. Then I noticed a small metal shelf against the far wall. It had a few VHS tapes lined up in a neat row, each one labeled in black marker with a date. The oldest was from the early 90s. The most recent said June 10th, 2016. That was just 2 weeks before I arrived. That's when something started to feel wrong. I took a few tapes upstairs. There was a VCR hooked up to the little old TV in the living room. I sat down, popped in the first tape, and hit play. The footage was grainy and green-tinted, probably filmed in night vision. It showed a man sleeping on the couch, the same couch I'd been sitting on. The camera was still positioned in the corner of the room. The man in the footage turned a few times, but didn't wake up. I fast-forwarded. Nothing happened. Hours of someone just sleeping. It creeped me out more than I expected. I tried another tape. Same setup. This time a woman was asleep in the bedroom. The camera must have been placed in the corner of the room, angled at the bed. She moved a little during the night, but again, nothing else. No sound, no motion from whoever was recording. Just silent footage, always filmed from some hidden spot inside the cabin. I watched 3 more. Different people each time, sometimes a couple, sometimes alone. Always at night, always sleeping. No explanations, no context. I felt like I shouldn't be watching them, like I was part of something I didn't understand. My skin crawled, but I had to check the last one. The one from just 2 weeks ago. I put it in and hit play. The angle was different this time. It was the bedroom again, the same room I had been sleeping in the night before. My heart started beating faster. At first, it was just the empty room, dimly lit by moonlight through the window. Then, after a minute or so, I saw myself walk into the room. I was in my pajamas. I crawled into bed and pulled the blanket over me. I was asleep within minutes. The camera didn't move, didn't zoom, but someone had to have set it up. Someone had to have come into the cabin before I got there. Or worse, while I was already there. I stopped the tape, just yanked it out and dropped it on the floor. I sat there for a long time, my hands shaking, heart racing. I tried to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe my uncle had filmed guests. Maybe he had security cameras and just recorded everyone for some reason. But that last tape was of me, and I hadn't even known there was a camera. I grabbed my backpack and started throwing everything inside. I didn't even shut the drawers or fold anything. I was out of the cabin in under 10 minutes. I got in my car and drove down the mountain road until I hit a gas station with a working payphone. I called the police from there. When I explained what I found, they took it seriously. A few officers met me back at the cabin later that day. I showed them the tapes, the basement, everything. They took the recordings and launched an investigation. A week later, I got a call from the detective handling the case. He asked me where I got the keys to the cabin. I told him my uncle had sent me an email and told me they'd be under a fake rock by the steps. He went quiet for a second and then said, "Your uncle's been dead for over 2 years. He passed in 2014. That didn't make sense. I got the email a month ago, but when they traced the email address, it didn't match anything from my uncle's records. They said someone had created it just months earlier. Whoever gave me the keys, whoever I thought was my uncle, wasn't him. Just someone pretending to be. Someone who'd been living in that cabin, or at least using it, and filming people while they slept. The police never found the guy. There were no fingerprints in the cabin, no DNA. Whoever it was, they knew what they were doing. I haven't gone back since, and I never will. I still think about it sometimes. How long had he been doing it? How many people had he watched? Had he ever done more than just film? I'll never know. All I know is that I spent a night in that cabin, thinking I was alone, not knowing someone had been in the walls, behind the door, even in the room, watching, recording, and I'll never feel fully safe again. I booked an Airbnb in Pittsburgh for a week last October. I was there for a conference, and all the hotels nearby were either booked or insanely expensive. The Airbnb was in a quiet neighborhood, about 15 minutes from the city center. It looked nice enough in the pictures, clean, modern, a little basement suite with a private entrance from the back of the house. The price was good, and the reviews were mostly positive. A few mentioned that the place was a little dark or not great for light sleepers, but nothing alarming. I arrived in the early evening. The sun was already dipping low, and the street was quiet. Just rows of identical brick houses with sloping backyards. The host had left the key in a lockbox, and I let myself in through the back. The backyard was small and fenced in, with a cracked concrete path that led down a few steps to the basement entrance. The door was heavy and painted dark green, with a dent near the bottom like someone had once kicked it hard. Inside, the place was cold. Not freezing, just that kind of basement chill that settles into your clothes. The space was clean but cramped. Low ceiling, narrow hallway, and the faint smell of concrete dust and something a little musty. There was a small kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower stall, a twin bed pushed up against the far wall, and a small desk by a narrow window that looked out at dirt and weeds. I unpacked, set up my laptop, and tried to settle in. The first night was fine. I was tired from traveling, so I crashed early and slept through most of it. But around 4 a.m., I woke up for no clear reason, just wide awake in the dark. I listened for a bit. I could hear a soft, dull, thudding sound, like footsteps above me. Someone walking slowly across the floor upstairs. Not unusual, right? People live there. But the footsteps just kept going back and forth for maybe 15-20 minutes. No other sounds. No TV, no voices, just steady, slow walking. Then silence. I brushed it off. The next day I was out all day, barely came back until late at night. I showered, read a bit, and fell asleep. Night 2, I woke up again. Same time, that same sound. Only this time, it didn't stay above me. I was laying there, still groggy, listening to the creaks above when I heard something new. A clicking noise from the laundry area near the back of the unit. There was a small utility closet there with an old water heater and fuse box. The clicking sounded like metal tapping against metal. Not fast, just one click, pause, then another. I stayed in bed, listening hard, trying to tell myself it was just pipes or something settling. But it kept happening. Click, pause, click. Eventually it stopped, and I must have fallen back asleep. The next morning, I checked the closet. Nothing looked weird. The pipes were old, some rust along the edges, but no leaks, no signs of animals or anything like that. I didn't see any obvious cause for the noise. Still, I told myself it was just a building thing. Old house, no big deal. That night, I had a weird feeling even before going to bed. The air felt heavier. I can't explain it. Just that off feeling, like you're being watched. The lights flickered once while I was brushing my teeth, and I noticed the bathroom mirror was slightly fog around the edges, like there was humidity even though I hadn't used hot water yet. Again, I told myself I was overthinking things. I left the lamp on by the bed when I went to sleep. Around 3:45, I woke up again. Not just awake, I sat straight up in bed like something had jolted me. The room was dead silent. Even the little space heater wasn't running. I reached over and flicked the light switch on the lamp. Nothing. It was off. I checked my phone. It still had battery, but the time read 12:09. That didn't make sense. It was clearly the middle of the night. I opened a news app just to confirm the time, and it loaded fine, showing 3:47 a.m. My phone's clock had reset. That's when I heard the clicking again, this time closer. It wasn't coming from the closet. It was coming from the hallway just outside the bedroom. I sat completely still. I hadn't locked the door to the unit from the inside, just the entrance door from outside. The hallway light was off, and I couldn't see anything, but the clicking was there. Sharp, deliberate, like someone tapping a key or coin on the wall. I stayed like that, frozen, for probably 20 minutes. The clicking stopped eventually, and I forced myself to get up, turn the hallway light on. Nothing there. No sign anyone had come in. The outside door was still locked. At that point, I seriously considered leaving. But it was 4 a.m., I had nowhere else to go, and the rational part of me kept saying I was being ridiculous. Maybe electrical issues were messing with the clock. Maybe there were animals in the walls. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I contacted the host. Just a simple message asking if there had been any issues with the power or if the unit had ever had rodent problems. The response came hours later, short and casual. Nope. No problems I'm aware of. Maybe try keeping the heater off at night. It might be drawing too much current. I didn't reply. That night, I was too wired to sleep. I left every light on, even the ones in the hallway. I plugged my phone into a different socket, watched some dumb videos to kill time. Around 2 a.m., I heard a faint scratching noise from the bathroom. Not like metal on metal, more like nails or fingers against drywall. I grabbed my phone and turned the flashlight on. I moved toward the bathroom slowly. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the air was damp again, like someone had taken a hot shower. The mirror was fogged up more than before. I wiped it with my sleeve and saw what looked like 3 vertical scratches on the drywall, just above the sink. Not deep, but fresh, like someone had dragged something sharp down the surface. I hadn't noticed them before. They weren't there the previous nights. I would have seen them when brushing my teeth. I stared at them for a while, feeling my stomach twist. That was it for me. I started packing right then. Tossed everything into my bag, didn't even fold my clothes. I opened the hallway door to the main exit and noticed something strange. Tiny shavings of wood on the floor near the doorframe. I bent down and ran my fingers through them. The frame had been scratched, same height as the bathroom wall. Not wide enough to be from a tool. It looked like fingernails. I left the lights on, locked the door behind me, and walked straight to a diner about 10 blocks away that was open 24 hours. I booked a hotel from my phone while sipping black coffee I couldn't taste. I never went back to the Airbnb. I left the key in the mailbox and messaged the host saying I had an emergency and had to leave early. I didn't ask for a refund. A few weeks later, I was back home and finally feeling more like myself. One night, I remembered the scratches and the mirror fogging up. I was curious, so I went back to the Airbnb listing just to see if anyone else had mentioned anything strange. The listing was gone. Not marked unavailable. Not currently off market. Just completely wiped. I Googled the address and found a zoning permit application from earlier that month. The property owner had filed for a remodel. The documents listed conversion of basement unit to single-family use only. Prior layout deemed non-compliant with safety codes. That was all it said. I never figured out who had been in the unit with me. If anyone, I didn't report it. I didn't want to get pulled into some drawn-out back and forth with the police or the host or whoever. But I haven't used Airbnb since. I stick to hotels now, no matter the price. I rented a remote cabin in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in early October, about a month after a really messy breakup. I'd been with her for 4 years, and when it ended, it felt like my whole life had been stripped away overnight. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to go out drinking or crash on a friend's couch or pretend I was okay. I wanted to get as far away from people as I could. Just trees, cold air, silence. I found the cabin on a website that catered to long-term rentals. The ad said perfect for solitude and deep woods, no nearby neighbors, and I was sold. I booked it for 2 weeks and packed everything I thought I'd need. Frozen meals, firewood, some books, a couple knives, a small hatchet, and my old hiking boots. The drive up took the better part of a day. Once I got off the main highways, it was nothing but winding gravel roads through forests that seemed to stretch forever. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, it was early evening and getting cold. The place was tucked into trees, no other houses or cabins in sight, just woods on all sides. It was old, maybe from the 50s, but well maintained. The outside was wood planked, painted a kind of faded brown red, and there was a little porch with a single chair and a pair of empty flower pots. The key was under a stone frog next to the steps, just like the owner had said. Inside, the cabin was small but cozy. There was a main room with a wood stove, a couch, a kitchenette with an old gas stove, and a tiny table with 2 chairs. The bedroom was at the end of the hallway, past a small bathroom with a tub and a rusty mirror. The place smelled like cedar and something faintly sweet like old pipe tobacco. But there was one thing that stuck out immediately: the last door on the left at the end of the hallway. It was painted the same as the others, but the lock on it was different. It was newer, much newer. An industrial silver deadbolt with a keyhole, not one of the older brass doorknobs like the others. It was locked tight, no key in sight. I figured it was a utility closet or the owner's private storage. Still, something about it felt wrong. It didn't match the rest of the cabin. The first night was uneventful. I made some pasta, poured a drink, and read until I was too tired to keep my eyes open. The woods were so quiet I could hear my own breathing. The second night is when things started to feel off. Around midnight, I was still awake, scrolling through my phone when I heard something. It was faint, coming from the hallway. At first I thought maybe it was the wind pushing against the house. But then I heard it again, slow, steady, rhythmic. Breathing. Not my own. Not an animal's chittering or scratching. Actual breathing. Deep, steady inhales and exhales coming from behind that locked door. I held my breath, listening. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I didn't get up. I stayed completely still in bed and told myself it was the wind in the trees or maybe some kind of animal in the walls. Raccoons or squirrels. The forest was full of them. I eventually fell asleep, probably from sheer exhaustion. The next morning I walked down the hallway and saw something that made my stomach tighten. There were faint marks on the hardwood floor just outside that locked door. Light scuff marks, like the kind left by shoes when someone walks in place or shifts back and forth a lot. I knelt down and looked closer. They weren't scratches from claws or paws. They were from soles. Human shoes. It looked like someone had been standing there, pacing or maybe rocking from heel to toe. The wood was worn in a soft oval pattern. I tried to stay rational. Maybe the owner came by before I arrived. Maybe someone had been cleaning and just wore down the wood from standing there. Maybe it was all old damage and I just hadn't noticed it right away. But it didn't feel old. I would have seen it the first day. I went outside and walked around the cabin, checking every window and the front door. All locked. No signs of anything unusual. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. That day, I took a short hike just to clear my head. The trees were beautiful, turning red and gold and shedding leaves that made a soft crunch under my boots. I found a river about a mile away and sat on a log for a while. Tried to remind myself why I'd come. The peace, the quiet, the freedom. But the feeling I had when I looked back at that cabin never left me. That night, I decided to keep a knife on the nightstand. It was just a 4-inch blade I used for cooking or camping. Nothing fancy, but sharp. I turned in around 10 p.m., tired but wired, my ears tuned to every noise. I think I must have dozed off around midnight. Then I heard it, a soft click. It was so quiet it could have been nothing. But I knew. It was that lock, that door. I sat up fast, grabbed the knife, and crept out of bed barefoot. The hallway was completely dark, but I didn't want to turn on the lights. I moved slow, staying quiet. When I got halfway down the hall, I saw it. The door at the end was open. Just a crack, maybe 2 inches. Enough to see the edge of something gray behind it. I raised the knife and used the blade tip to push the door open. The room was maybe 6 by 6 feet. Bare concrete walls, no windows. In the middle of the room was a wooden chair, scratched up and stained. Against the back wall was a pile of things: an old sleeping bag, water bottles, empty chip bags, a half-used roll of toilet paper. Someone had been living in there. The smell hit me a second later: sweat, rot, old plastic, piss. I backed out of the room immediately, shut the door, and locked it with the bolt still hanging from the inside knob. I didn't bother packing. I grabbed my wallet, keys, phone, threw my boots on without tying them, and ran to the car. I started it so fast, I peeled out and sprayed gravel behind me. I drove an hour before I found a gas station that was open. The kid at the counter gave me a weird look, but I didn't care. I used their phone to call the sheriff's office. 2 deputies met me and followed me back to the cabin just after sunrise. I didn't go inside. I waited in the car while they cleared the place. When they came out, they confirmed it. Someone had been living in that locked room. There were signs they'd been there for a while. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows or doors, which meant whoever had a key. When they questioned the owner, he claimed he didn't know anything about it. Said he thought maybe his nephew was using the cabin sometimes. Said he didn't check it too often. But when they looked deeper into it, the guy didn't have a nephew. No family nearby at all. The lock had been added months earlier, according to receipts they found in his email. No record of any extra keys being given out. They never caught the guy. Whoever had been staying there left without a trace. No prints, no ID, nothing. Just his trash and that awful smell. I didn't go back. I left everything I brought behind. My clothes, gear, books. I didn't care. I was just glad I was alive and unharmed. Sometimes at night, I still think about that locked door, about the breathing. How long had he been there? Watching? Listening? Had he ever come out while I slept? I don't go into the woods alone anymore. Not because of bears or bad weather, but because sometimes the scariest thing out there isn't the dark or the isolation. It's the person already waiting inside. This happened about 7 years ago when I was 16, during my final summer as a camper at an overnight camp in New England. I've been going there since I was a little kid, and by that point I knew every trail, every cabin, every stupid ghost story the younger campers still got spooked by. That summer was special though. It was the last time I'd be there as a camper. I was a senior, as we called ourselves, and we all tried to go out with a bang. Pull the best pranks, tell the scariest stories, make the most of our last weeks before real life started creeping in. One of the traditions at the camp was something we called the overnight. Every cabin got assigned 1 night per session to go on a long hike to a remote site and camp out under the stars. No tents, just sleeping bags, food cooked over a fire, and the woods all around. My cabin and one other were paired together for the overnight that year, and the spot we were assigned was about 2.5 miles away from the main camp, at the top of this massive hill that we always just called the Rock. It was a real climb to get up there, and once you reached the top, it opened up into this strange patch of flat, gray stone. Just bare rock, a few scraggly shrubs poking through cracks, surrounded on all sides by dense forest. It was completely quiet up there, almost too quiet sometimes, especially at night. We joked that it was the perfect place for a horror movie. That summer, the joke turned into something we took way too seriously. A few days before our overnight, one of the counselors told a story, probably trying to scare us for fun, about how there were townies who lived past the far side of the hill. Townies were just the people who lived in the nearby town, but we treated them like they were some strange tribe that hated us. The camp owned all the land around the lake and for miles beyond it, so we rarely saw anyone who wasn't part of camp. But the idea of townies creeping through the woods stuck in our heads. We started whispering about it late at night, making up stories about them watching us from the trees or planning to sneak in and mess with us. By the time the night of the overnight came, we were fully obsessed with the idea. We hiked up the hill in the late afternoon, sweating through our shirts, carrying way too much gear for a single night. The counselors let us set up near the edge of the trees where the ground was soft enough for sleeping bags and the fire pit was already made. We built a fire, cooked burgers and hot dogs, and by nightfall the whole group, maybe 16 kids between the 2 cabins plus 4 counselors, was sitting around telling scary stories and trying to out-creep each other. It was a clear night, chilly, but not uncomfortable, with the kind of stars you only see when you're far away from any city. Once it got late, most of the kids curled up in their bags. A few of us stayed up whispering, poking the fire, daring each other to walk to the edge of the rock and stare into the woods. That's when someone said they heard voices. It was quiet at first, just a couple of kids saying they thought they heard something moving out in the woods. Then more kids started hearing it too. Something like low talking, footsteps on leaves, maybe even a laugh. The fire flickered and popped, but when you really stopped and listened, it was like there was something out there. Not animals, something bigger. People. A few of the younger kids started to get scared. They whispered to the counselors, asking if we should move, maybe go back to camp early. The counselors told us it was our imaginations, that it was the wind or animals or just kids messing around. Still, two of the counselors said they'd check it out just to be sure. We were told to stay close to the fire, stay quiet, and wait. The two who went in were Joe and Thomas. Joe was a beast of a man, tall, maybe 6 feet 3 inches or more, all muscle. The kind of guy you'd expect to play linebacker or dunk a basketball without trying. Thomas was shorter, regular build, quiet, and a little more serious. They each grabbed flashlights and walked into the woods, their beams bouncing between the trees, slowly fading as they got farther away. At first, it was silent again. No voices, no movement, just the crackle of the fire and the sound of a few nervous kids breathing too hard. Then we heard it. It was Joe's voice, loud and sharp, echoing off the trees. "You guys can't be here. This is private property. We have a walkie-talkie, and we will call the police if you do not leave." Every kid froze. Our stomachs dropped at the exact same time. That wasn't the kind of voice you used to mess around. It was angry, serious, and we all knew Joe was too big to be scared unless there was something real. Then came the bang. A deep, awful crack that sounded like what hitting flesh or maybe metal. Then a scream, so sharp and raw, it didn't even sound human. It was the kind of scream that makes you want to run even if you don't know what you're running from. Seconds later, Joe burst out of the trees. His face was pale and wild, his arms smeared with dirt. He didn't look injured, but something in his eyes was wrong. He shouted to the other counselors, "Get the kids out of here now," and turned back without explaining a thing. He just ran straight back into the woods. Another counselor grabbed 2 of the big kitchen steak knives we'd brought for cooking and sprinted in after him without saying a word. That left 2 adults with a dozen terrified kids, most of us in our underwear or sleeping gear, with no idea what was happening. We didn't wait for answers. The counselors started yelling for us to grab what we could and run. Some of us didn't even put shoes on. We sprinted back down the trail, slipping on rocks, scraping our hands and legs on branches, crashing through underbrush in the pitch dark. Some kids were crying. Others were trying to be tough, holding sticks like weapons. One kid kept whispering a prayer under his breath the whole way down. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. The trail was steep and narrow, and a few of us fell more than once. The counselors were behind us, yelling for us to keep moving. Every sound from the woods made us jump. Snapping twigs, owls, even the wind in the trees. I honestly thought we were going to die, that someone was going to jump out of the woods and grab us. I kept imagining townies with knives or bats, waiting just off the trail. About halfway down the hill, just as my legs were about to give out, we saw lights behind us. Joe, Thomas, and the other counselor were catching up. They were breathing hard but unhurt. Joe had a big smile on his face. Thomas looked nervous. The third counselor looked furious. We didn't get any answers until we got all the way back to camp. We were brought into the dining hall, given water and blankets, and told to stay calm. Then they explained everything. Joe and Thomas had planned the whole thing. It was a prank. They thought it would be funny to scare us by pretending there were people in the woods. Joe's shouting, the bang, the scream, it was all fake. They had never seen anyone. The third counselor hadn't been told. So when he heard what he thought was an attack, he panicked like the rest of us. That's why he ran in with the knives. That's why we ran like our lives depended on it. The camp director was called. Parents were notified. Joe and Thomas got in serious trouble. I think they were fired that night, or maybe the next morning. The story spread fast. Everyone at camp knew about it by the next day. Most kids were still shaken. Some were pissed off. A few thought it was funny after they calmed down, but not many. After that, the camp made a new rule. Counselors were no longer allowed to play scary pranks or tell intense stories during overnights. They said it was for safety, which I guess made sense, but honestly, it was more about trust. After something like that, you don't really believe what the counselors tell you anymore. Even now, years later, I remember that night more clearly than any other moment from camp. The way the scream sounded, the way my heart felt like it was going to explode, the sheer terror of running barefoot down that hill in the dark. And the worst part? For a few seconds, I honestly thought someone had died, that someone had come into the woods and attacked us. I think some part of me still doesn't fully believe it was just a prank. I still wonder sometimes if they really were just messing around, or if maybe they saw something out there that they never admitted. We were out in the West Country, camping in this massive field that backed up right into a thick patch of woods. The kind of place that feels completely dead quiet the moment the sun drops below the hills. It was early spring, not too cold, but still chilly enough that once the sun dipped, you felt it in your bones. We were 5 lads and 1 girl, all of us around 20 or so, just there to drink, light a fire, and mess around for a weekend away from the noise of regular life. The campfire was our center, big as hell. We'd stacked up this makeshift fire pit with rocks from the field and wood we'd gathered from the edges of the forest. By the time it was dark, we had a proper blaze going. There were 6 of us, but only 5 went into the woods. One of the guys, Marcus, had brought his girlfriend, so we figured we'd let them have a moment to themselves by the fire while the rest of us did a bit of night exploring. We'd had a few beers already, and that jittery, half-sober, half-hyped kind of energy had built up in us. We weren't really planning on going deep into the woods, just poke around, freak each other out a bit, have a laugh. Just lads being idiots in the dark. Jake, the one in front, had this huge mag light. Not just your standard flashlight, either. This was the kind you could beat someone to death with, like the ones American cops use. Bright as hell, too. It cut clean through the darkness in a narrow beam. Then there was Neil with his stupid little camcorder that had night vision. He brought it along just to mess around with it. He didn't want to walk in the back, though, so it freaked him out. He wanted to be between someone. So I volunteered to take the rear, told him I'd hang back. So it was Jake in front with the light, then Neil filming, then Simon, then Jamie, and then me in the very back. The line moved slow because the forest path was narrow and overgrown in places. We couldn't walk side by side, and all we had was Jake's light pointing forward. Once we were out of that beam, it was pure black. I mean total, oppressive black. Like swimming in ink. The kind of black that makes you feel blind. As we went deeper, the trees got tighter. The branches stretched low over the path, and every few steps someone would curse after getting snagged by a twig or tripping over roots. It smelled like wet bark and moss, and the only sound were the crunch of boots, the occasional laugh, and Neil whispering stupid commentary into his camera. Nothing out of the ordinary. We were just trying to freak each other out. Imagine some maniac living out here, one of the guys said at some point. Just stupid stuff. But even that kind of talk, it's different when you're in the middle of pitch black woods, miles from the nearest town. We were maybe 10, 15 minutes in when it happened. It was sudden, the kind of noise that shocks your system. It came from off to the right, maybe 20, 30 feet out. Not right next to us, but close enough. It was a massive crack, like a dry log being split in 2 by a wood axe. But louder, thicker, heavier. Not a pop, not a twig. This was a big-ass log. Like something big had stomped on it or smashed it. It stopped all of us dead. Jake froze. The beam of his torch stopped mid-step, frozen in the center of the path. Neil stopped filming. I couldn't see any of their faces, but you could feel the tension ripple back down the line to me. No one said anything, and for a second, we just stood there listening. The forest was dead silent. No wind, no birds, no rustling. That quiet, unnatural silence that presses down on your ears. Slowly, Jake started to swing the torch beam off the path to the right, where the sound had come from. At first, it just lit up trees, then more trees, and then something else. I don't know what the hell it was. It wasn't a tree. It wasn't an animal I recognized. It was a mass, A dark, bulky shape. It was tall, taller than a man, maybe wider. It stood there, not moving, kind of hunched. Not crouched like a person or an animal, but hunched like it didn't fit properly between the trees. The light barely reached it. We didn't get details. No face, no features. Just a big, bulky thing standing still in the trees. I didn't wait for any explanation. I just turned and ran. Full sprint, no hesitation. My legs were moving before I even registered what I was doing. My heart was pounding in my throat, and I couldn't even scream. I just laughed. I don't know why. A weird, high-pitched laugh, like I'd completely lost control of myself. But my brain had no idea how else to process what we'd seen. Behind me, I heard Neil shout, "God damn it," and then his footsteps pounding the dirt after me. Then Jake and the others, crashing through the underbrush, yelling, running. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if it was following. The way out of the woods was a blur. I just followed the path by memory, only stopping once I saw the firelight flickering through the trees. We burst into the clearing like lunatics, out of breath, stumbling, panicked. Marcus and his girlfriend just looked up at us like we were idiots. They hadn't heard anything. We told them everything in a rush about the noise, the shape, what we'd seen. They didn't believe us. Not really. They thought we were just messing about, hyped up, maybe a bit too into our own story. But we weren't lying. I know what I saw. We all saw it. Still, the fire was bright, and the sky was clear. We were in a wide open field, away from the trees. We figured as long as we stayed out in the open, we'd be fine. That thing, whatever it was, hadn't followed us. At least, we didn't think so. We didn't see it again. Didn't hear anything after that. I ended up taking some ecstasy about an hour later. Not the smartest move, I guess, but I needed something to level me out. My brain was still buzzing from the fear. Everything felt a bit surreal after that. The fire looked like it was breathing. The stars stretched and blinked in patterns. I lay back in the grass, staring at the sky, trying to forget the thing in the woods. I didn't sleep much that night, but I didn't feel scared anymore either. We stayed up until sunrise. No more noises, no more shapes. In the daylight, the woods looked harmless again. We even walked the path the next morning, just to prove to ourselves we hadn't imagined it. We didn't find anything. No tracks, no broken log, nothing. It looked like nothing had ever happened. But I know what I saw. We all do. We don't talk about it much now. I guess there's nothing to say. No one else would believe it, and I've never been able to explain it. We don't have bears in England. No moose. No wild animals that big. Whatever it was real. It made a sound that vibrated through the trees, in a shape I still see when I close my eyes in the dark. I haven't been back to that field since. When I think back to that trip, the first thing I remember is the sound of small rocks skipping over the surface of the lake. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, still at that age where I looked up to my dad like he could do anything, like nothing bad could happen as long as I was holding his hand. We were in Yellowstone, just the two of us on a summer camping trip, staying a few nights in a tent near the lake. It was one of those days that felt like a picture on a postcard. Blue sky, warm sunlight, the wind light enough to rustle the pine needles above us, but not cold enough to need a jacket. I was wearing one of those old plastic sun visors, bright red and slightly too big, and my dad had helped me dig a little pouch on my belt loop to collect cool rocks. We had been walking near the lake, tossing stones, just laughing and talking about which one skipped best, which one made the biggest splash. We weren't on a trail, just weaving our way between trees and tall dry grass along the edge of the water. It was so quiet except for the occasional chirp of a bird or the splash of a stone hitting the water. It was late afternoon, and the sun was starting to drop lower behind the hills. Shadows were stretching longer across the water. My dad checked his watch. He always wore a big one with a thick black strap, and I remember the way the sun hit the scratched up glass. He said we should start heading back soon, so we could cook before it got too dark. That was when we saw him. There was a man sitting maybe 50 or 60 feet away, leaned up against a tree. He was slumped, like someone who had been hiking and just took a break. His head was tilted down a little, chin resting almost on his chest, arms resting in his lap. He had a wide-brimmed hat pulled down low, some kind of old canvas jacket on, and boots that were caked in dry mud. From a distance, nothing looked strange. We even joked a little. My dad said something like, he picked a good spot for a nap. But the light was fading, and my dad wasn't the type to leave things to chance. You figure the guy had maybe gotten too tired, or had a little too much to drink, or just didn't know how cold it got at night up there. My dad didn't want someone freezing out in the woods, so he started walking over. I followed behind him, still holding a few small rocks in my hand. At first, it was just quiet, but when we got within 20 feet or so, we noticed the smell. It hit me first. I stopped walking. It wasn't the kind of smell you expect in the woods. It wasn't the smell of dead animals or rot. It was just awful, thick, like someone had filled the air with garbage and sewage. It made my nose sting. It made the back of my throat burn. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't like it. My dad must have smelled it too, because he suddenly stopped and told me to stay put. I did, more than willingly. He walked ahead a few more feet, cautiously now. I remember him standing there for a second, maybe hoping the guy would move or say something. Then he called out, not loud, just firm. He always had a calm voice, even when he was serious. No response. He said it again, louder. Nothing. I stood still and watched as my dad got closer, stepped around to the guy's side, and gently tapped him on the shoulder. That's when the man moved. It wasn't like he woke up or anything. He just shifted, more like he collapsed slightly, like something had given way. His body made this awful crunching sound, quiet but sharp, like twigs breaking under weight. His hat slipped off and fell to the side. My dad didn't say anything, but I could see the change in his face from where I was standing. The air felt heavier, colder. The guy's face was the worst part. Because of how he'd been sitting, all the blood had drained to one side of his head. One half was pale, grayish white. The other was a deep, dark purple, like it had been dipped in ink. One of his eyes was blood red. Not just the white of it, but the whole thing, popped, swollen, like something had broken inside. His mouth hung, slightly open, and his lips looked dry and cracked. His body looked stiff, almost frozen in place, except for where it had shifted. My dad turned around quickly and walked over to me. He didn't say anything for a second, just looked down at me with a serious face and told me we were going to the ranger station. He didn't take my hand, just kept me walking fast in front of him, not running but steady and fast. I think I was too young to fully process what I had seen. I just knew something was wrong. I didn't talk the whole way back. The ranger station wasn't too far, maybe a 10 or 15-minute walk. It was a small wooden building near the edge of the camping area. My dad told the first person we saw that we needed help, that someone was dead out by the lake. I remember a woman coming out from behind the counter and crouching down to talk to me. I didn't feel like talking. She had this massive puff of yellow, curly hair, and I thought she looked like Big Bird. That stuck with me. She gave me some water and let me sit on a bench inside the station while my dad left with a ranger and a paramedic who had been nearby. They had a small off-road vehicle, and I remember hearing it start up and drive off. I just sat there for a long time. The woman gave me some kind of hard candy and tried to keep me distracted. I don't remember if I cried or not. I just remember my legs swinging off the bench and my fingers sticky from the candy. It was dark by the time my dad came back. He looked tired, like someone had pressed a heavy weight down on his shoulders. He didn't say much, just rubbed my head and told me everything was fine and that I had done a good job listening. Later that night, back at our tent, he told me the man had been out there a while, that he might have been alone or gotten sick, or maybe even just wandered off trail and couldn't find his way back. He didn't go into details. I don't know if he ever found out the full story, but I do know he sat up most of the night outside the tent in one of those collapsible chairs, holding a flashlight in his lap. He didn't go to sleep until the sky started to get light again. We cut the trip short and drove home the next morning. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. Not in school, not to friends. It wasn't a story that felt like it belonged anywhere. It wasn't dramatic or exciting. It was just real. And it stuck with me in that strange way childhood memories do, half vivid and half blurred. Sometimes I wonder what happened to that man. If someone missed him, if he had family looking for him, or if he just slipped away quietly one afternoon in the woods, not far from where father and his kid were skipping stones and laughing, completely unaware. That trip was supposed to be just another fun adventure with my dad, and it was for the most part. But ever since then, I've never walked through a quiet patch of woods without looking twice at every shape, every still figure in the distance. Because sometimes they don't move, and sometimes they've been sitting there longer than you want to believe. I booked the place late one night while lying in bed, scrolling through listings on Airbnb. I had a work conference in Portland and figured I'd stay a couple extra days after. I wanted something cheap, quiet, and away from the city. Most of the listings were expensive or too close to traffic or had shared spaces. Then this one popped up. It didn't even have a proper title, just said house for rent. Long stays welcome. The price was about half of everything else. The photos weren't good either. Grainy shots of a dimly lit house in the woods, like someone had taken them with an old phone just before sunset. Most of the rooms looked empty, bare walls and single pieces of furniture. But the kitchen looked clean, and the listing said it had Wi-Fi, running water, a lockbox for entry, and a washer/dryer. It had 4 reviews, all of them short and vague, but positive. Peaceful stay, good for focus, no problems, that kind of thing. I booked it for 4 nights. The drive there took longer than I expected. Once I got off the main roads, the GPS guided me through winding forest back roads that narrowed to a single lane in some parts. There were no houses, no gas stations, nothing but trees. My cell signal dropped about 20 minutes before I arrived. It was just before sunset when I pulled up to the place. A single-story home set back off a gravel driveway, surrounded on all sides by thick pine forest. The house looked older than in the photos. Paint was peeling around the windows, and one of the gutters was hanging loose. There was no porch light and no sign of any other homes nearby. I parked the car and grabbed my duffel bag. The air smelled like pine and moss, wet and earthy. The code for the lockbox worked, and I stepped inside. The place was quiet, too quiet. No hum of fridge, no ticking clock, just stillness. I flipped the light switch by the door. The bulb overhead buzzed for a second, then gave off a weak yellow glow. The air inside smelled faintly like old wood and something else, something faintly metallic, like rust. I walked through the house slowly. The furniture was minimal. A couch in the living room, a folding table in the kitchen, one bed in the master bedroom with a thin, flat mattress, a small desk in a spare room. The place was cold, and I noticed there was no thermostat, just a space heater plugged into the wall in the hallway. The bathroom had a working toilet and shower, though the water came out with a groan and spit rust for a few seconds before running clear. There were no personal touches anywhere. No books, no dishes in the cabinets, no pictures on the walls. It didn't feel like a rental or a home. It felt like something someone had emptied out and forgotten. I chalked it up to laziness. Some landlord throwing it on Airbnb to make passive income. I unpacked a bit, plugged in my laptop at the desk, and tried the Wi-Fi. It worked barely, just enough to check email, not much else. Still, I wasn't planning to stream anything. I just wanted quiet to work. That first night, I heard something outside around 2 in the morning. A crunching sound, like someone walking on the gravel. I was lying in bed, wide awake because the heater kept making a clicking noise every few minutes. The window by the bed didn't have curtains, just dirty blinds that didn't fully close. I stayed still, listening. It could have been an animal, a deer, a raccoon, maybe a branch falling. It stopped after a few seconds, and I eventually fell asleep. The next day was uneventful. I made coffee with the cheap drip machine, opened my laptop, and got some writing done. Around noon, I stepped outside for some fresh air. I stood in the driveway and looked around. No cars had passed since I arrived. I hadn't seen a single neighbor or person. It was just trees in every direction. I realized how completely isolated the place was. That might have bothered me if I'd been in a different mood, but part of me liked it. I was tired of people. That night I noticed something odd. When I went in the bathroom to brush my teeth, I saw that the mirror above the sink had streaks on it. Long, pale smudges like someone had wiped it with their fingers. I hadn't noticed them before, but I assumed maybe I just hadn't looked closely. Still, it made me pause. I wiped it down with a rag and let it go. Around 3 a.m., I woke up again. I hadn't heard anything, but I sat up straight in bed, heart pounding like I'd been pulled out of sleep. The heater had turned off, and the room was freezing. I sat there listening. That same metallic smell was stronger. I got up and walked into the hallway. The whole house felt different, like it was holding its breath. I checked the front door. Still locked. I stood there for a while, unsure why I felt so on edge. Eventually, I went back to bed. The next morning, I saw fresh shoe prints in the dirt by the side of the house. They weren't mine. I'd only walked in front of the house when I arrived, and these were clear prints in the damp soil near the back window. They led from the trees to the house, then back toward the woods. No reason for anyone to be out there. I stared at them for a long time, then walked back inside and locked all the windows. That day I couldn't focus. I sat at the desk, trying to work, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. I thought about leaving early, but I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe the prints were old or just hikers passing through. I stayed inside the rest of the day and didn't open the blinds. That night, things got worse. I was lying in bed around midnight when I heard the back door rattle. Just a single noise, metal shaking in the frame. I sat up instantly. The heater was off again. The house was dead silent. I didn't move. I just listened. Then I heard it again. A slow creaking sound. Not the door. The floorboards. Somewhere near the kitchen. Someone was inside. I grabbed the only thing near me, my laptop, and crept into the hallway. I didn't turn the lights on. I moved toward the kitchen as quietly as I could. I could barely breathe. When I peeked around the corner, no one was there. But the back door, the one I hadn't touched since arriving, was wide open. Beyond it was just blackness and trees. I didn't think. I grabbed my keys, phone, and bag and walked straight out the front door to my car. I didn't even stop to lock the house behind me. I drove down that long gravel road with my high beams on full, heart pounding so hard I felt sick. I didn't stop driving until I was back on the highway, signal restored, lights and cars and signs around me again. I pulled into a rest stop and sat there until sunrise. My phone had 2 missed calls, both from a number I didn't recognize. No voicemails. I checked the Airbnb app and opened the listing. It was gone, completely deleted. Not just unavailable, gone. The messages I'd exchanged with the host were gone too. My reservation history just showed a blank space for those dates. I emailed Airbnb support and got a generic reply about reviewing unusual listings. I never got a straight answer. I never told anyone the full story. I just said the place fell off. I didn't want to sound crazy, but sometimes at night, I still think about the sound of those floorboards. The prints in the dirt. That open door. Someone had been watching. Someone had come inside, and I had no idea how long they'd been there before I woke up. Camping has always been my thing. I grew up doing it with my family, then with friends, and later with my boyfriend. I always found peace in it. The woods, the quiet, the simplicity of it all. It was a way to reset, to get away from everything. I never felt unsafe, never had a moment that made me question being out there. Until this past summer. That trip changed everything for me. My boyfriend and I decided to head out to the gorge for a little getaway. We've been out there a handful of times before, usually with a group, but this time we thought we'd try it just the 2 of us. No distractions, just us, the trees, and the stars. It sounded perfect. The area we picked wasn't too far off the road, about a mile hike back into the woods to a spot I knew well. I had camped there a few times before and felt comfortable with the layout of the land. The hiking was a bit steep in parts, but manageable. I remembered a few good spots that offered some privacy while still being close enough to the trail if we needed to get out quickly. We parked the car at the trailhead and got out to unload our gear. As we were pulling out our packs and getting everything together, 2 guys came out of the woods, heading back toward an old VW camper van parked a few spaces down from us. Something about them immediately felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but they had this look, unkempt, quiet, eyes lingering too long on us. They didn't say a word, just stared as they walked past and got into the van. I told myself it was nothing. I've run into all kinds of people in the woods over the years. Most are harmless. Still, there was a weird energy around them, and I felt it settle into the back of my mind like a stone in water. I didn't mention it to my boyfriend at the time. No point in ruining the mood. We hiked back to the spot I had in mind. The woods were thick and green, the air still and warm. As we walked, I checked out a few of the usual camping areas I knew. There was a spot I liked further up the hill, but as we got closer, I saw a small camp already set up there. It looked makeshift and scattered, like someone had been living there for a while. I didn't see anyone right away, but I could hear faint shouting off in the distance. Someone arguing, maybe more than one person. I didn't like it, so we headed downhill a bit to a flatter area that was more tucked away. It wasn't completely hidden, but it wasn't obvious from the main trail either. I felt better once we started setting up. It was late afternoon by then. The sun was starting to dip low behind the trees. We got the tent up, unrolled the sleeping bags, and I began looking around for some firewood. That's when I noticed someone moving through the trees up the hill. He came out of nowhere, no sound, no warning, just suddenly there. He was thin, looked weathered, probably in his late 30s or early 40s, maybe older. Beard patchy, clothes dirty and worn. He had a sort of wild look in his eyes, but he smiled like he was trying too hard to look friendly. He asked if we needed help getting a fire going and said he had some firewood to sell, $10 a bundle. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. We were in a forest, after all. Wood was everywhere. But then he said the area had been cleared out already, that they had been collecting it over the past few weeks. That word, they stuck with me. I asked how long he'd been out there, and he said almost a month. That didn't sit right. This was national forest land. I knew the rules. 2 weeks max for camping in one place. I asked if he was alone, and he said he was. But I'd heard yelling earlier, and I brought that up. He stammered a bit, then said some guys he knew were camped further up on the other side of the river. The more he talked, the more uneasy I felt. His stories didn't add up. He told us he was from Pennsylvania, had taken a bus to Lexington, and had been living in the woods ever since. He said he'd been staying in the forest behind some local stores in town before making his way out to the gorge. I knew exactly the place he was talking about. I'd seen people moving in and out of those woods before. People without homes, addicts, people trying to disappear. Now he was out here, deep in the gorge, supposedly by himself, living off snakes and bugs and selling firewood for beer money. It didn't make sense, and he kept changing details every time he spoke. He asked if we wanted to come see his campsite, and even though I didn't want to, I felt like refusing might make things worse. So we followed him just far enough to see it. There was too much stuff, tents, tarps, coolers, even a small grill. No way it was just him. And the way it was set up, it was high on a ridge with a direct view of where we were camped. He even said he liked it up there, so he could watch everything. It didn't feel like he meant that in an innocent way. I could feel my skin crawl when he said it. When we got back to our camp, it was almost dark. He hung around a little longer, helping us light the fire, still rambling on, trying to be friendly, but it all felt forced and wrong. I wanted him gone. I kept looking at my boyfriend, hoping he'd catch on. Eventually, the guy wandered off back up the hill, and I could finally speak freely. I told my boyfriend we had to leave. Right then, I didn't feel safe. We had no weapon, no means of protection, not even a dog. If something happened in the night, we'd be helpless. I didn't trust that guy, and I didn't believe he was alone. His stories were full of holes, and something about his presence made every alarm bell in my head ring. We decided to pack up and get out quietly. I knew the sound of pulling down the tarps would carry, so we left them behind. We moved fast, careful not to make much noise. I had my headlamp off, walking by moonlight, just trying to get enough distance before switching it on. I had my pack on and was just about to head off down the path when I heard his voice again. "How's it going down there?" He was watching, maybe from the ridge, maybe closer. I didn't turn to look. I didn't answer. We just started walking, fast and quiet, moving downhill toward the trailhead. My heart was pounding. Every step felt like it took forever. I kept thinking we'd hear footsteps behind us or see a flashlight beam in the trees, but we didn't. We made it back to the car without incident. Threw our packs in the back, didn't even change out of our boots, just got in and drove. I didn't stop until we were well out of the gorge, back on a main road with other cars around us and lights on in houses. The next morning, I called the rangers and told them everything. I described the man, the setup, what he told us, where he said he was from, how long he claimed to have been there, the other voices I'd heard. They said they'd check it out. I don't know if they did. I never heard back, but I never went back there either. Not after that. All he got from us was a couple of tarps, but we could have lost a lot more. I think about that night often. How easy it is to let your guard down in a place that's always felt like home. How fast things can go from peaceful to dangerous. I still love camping. I always will. But I'm different now. I carry protection. I triple check my surroundings. And I don't ignore my gut anymore. Because that night, I was lucky. But I don't plan on needing luck the next time. It was sometime in the fall of 2011, I think. The leaves hadn't fully changed, but the edge of summer was definitely gone. Me and my buddy, I'll just call him Jake, had decided to take a few days off work and get out to Beaver Lake, near Bolivar, Missouri. We both needed a break. The plan was simple: drive out, hike around until we found a decent clearing near the water, fish a little, maybe cook up something fresh if we were lucky, and just sleep under the trees for a couple of nights. Nothing fancy, just us, our gear, and some time away from everything. We pulled in that morning after an early breakfast and started hiking with our packs. The lake wasn't busy, probably too late in the season for most folks. It was cool, but not cold, probably mid-60s. We were in no rush, just picking our way through trails, stepping over tree roots, and taking in the quiet. We looked for a good flat spot with some tree cover. Not too close to the waterline, but close enough to have easy access. After a couple hours of walking, we found it a wide patch of flat, soft ground with enough space to pitch a tent and build a fire ring. It was about 20 or 30 feet from the lake's edge, slightly elevated, with a nice view of the water through the trees. We both dropped our packs and stood there for a while, just listening and breathing in that clean air. We set up camp pretty quickly. Tent, sleeping bags, food storage tied up, a rough fire pit circled with rocks. Nothing fancy. Once everything was in place, we lay back on our sleeping pads in the shade and dozed for a while. The walk had worn us out more than we expected, and there was still plenty of daylight left. We planned to fish in the afternoon, maybe cook by sunset, and stay up a while by the fire. Nothing out of the ordinary. After the nap, we grabbed our rods and started working our way along the edge of the lake. That's when things started feeling off. The lake didn't stink exactly, but there was a stale, heavy smell to the air. Not quite rotten, but close. At first, we thought it was just a normal lake smell, muck, algae, maybe something dead nearby. But then we started noticing things in the shallows. Fish skeletons, dozens of them scattered along the shoreline. Not just a few here and there. There were clusters of them half buried in the mud or caught in reeds. Small fish, big fish, even a couple turtles that looked bloated and pale, the kind that looked like they hadn't died yesterday. Some were just shells. Some still had dried bits of skin hanging off the bones. I remember crouching down to look at one of the turtles. Its shell was cracked, not like from an animal or from decay, just split clean down the middle like it had been dropped or burst. Jake didn't say much, just kind of stood behind me staring at the water. The lake was still. No ripples except from our footsteps. No birds. No frogs. It was strange how quiet it was, even then, but we were more focused on trying to figure out what the hell had happened to all the fish. We walked the bank for another 30 minutes, rods in hand, trying to spot better fishing spots, but the further we went, the more we saw dead stuff. Even what looked like a raccoon a little up the bank, curled in on itself, fur thinned out and skin stretched tight. Nothing about that lake felt right. We fished for a while anyway, maybe a few hours. Not a single bite, not even a tug. The water looked clean enough, clear, no scum or algae blooms. But there was nothing in it. No movement, no insects dancing on the surface, no minnows in the shallows. It was like the lake was dead. We stuck it out until dusk, just hoping we were wrong, but eventually we gave up and made our way back to camp. We lit a small fire, boiled some water, made a quick meal from the freeze-dried food we'd brought, and sat around staring into the flames. That's when the silence really started pressing in. Normally, you go camping in Missouri and you'll hear stuff all night. Owls, coyotes, frogs, crickets, raccoons digging around. That night, there was almost nothing. Just the occasional buzz from an insect and the crackle of our fire. No birds, no rustling, no wind. The air felt thick and the forest felt like it was holding its breath. We try not to talk about it too much. I think neither of us wanted to admit how uncomfortable we were. We kept glancing at the tree lean, expecting to see movement, but there was nothing. No glowing eyes, no rustle of leaves. Just stillness. A dead kind of stillness. When it came time to turn in, we didn't sleep well. The silence was too much. Every time I started to drift off, I'd suddenly become hyper-aware of how quiet it was. The kind of quiet that gets into your head and makes your ears ring. Even when I rolled over or shifted in my sleeping bag, I felt like I was being too loud. Like something out there was listening. I kept waking up every hour or so. At one point, I opened the tent flap just to peek out. The fire had burned down to embers, and the lake looked like black glass through the trees. No mist, no breeze, just stillness. I sat there for a while, listening. Not because I heard something, but because I didn't. No owls, no bugs, no splashes. Just a low hum in my ears from the sheer lack of sound. By morning, we were both awake before the sun had fully come up. Neither of us had really slept. We stepped out of the tent, stretched, and walked toward the water. The sky was pale gray and the air had that damp, early morning chill to it. But the quiet was still there. Not even a single bird call. No squirrels in the trees. Just the crunch of our boots on dry leaves. That was when it really hit me. Something was wrong with that place. You can't have a healthy forest next to a lake and hear nothing. We talked about it a little while eating a dry breakfast bar. The dead fish, the dry night, the silence. We hadn't brought much water with us, just enough for the first day and some for cooking. We'd planned on purifying lake water for the rest of the trip. But looking at that lake now, we knew there was no way in hell we were drinking from it. Whatever had happened to the wildlife, it had to be from the water. Maybe some kind of chemical runoff. Maybe illegal dumping upstream. It didn't matter. We couldn't stay. The air didn't feel right, and the lake was a dead zone. Even if it was just some weird fluke, we weren't going to risk getting sick or stranded out there with no water. We packed up as quickly as we could. No real talk, just moving. Tent down, trash bag, fire pit scattered. By the time the sun was properly up, we had our packs on and were heading back down the trail. We didn't take breaks, just kept walking. Not because we were afraid of anything jumping out of the woods, but because we both had that low, anxious feeling in our guts. Like we weren't supposed to be there. Like we'd wandered into some part of the woods that was trying to keep itself secret. It took us a couple hours to get back to the car. When we finally saw it through the trees, we both let out a breath at the same time. That was the first noise either of us had made in a while. We didn't say much on the drive back. Just kept glancing out the window, watching the trees pass by. I've camped a lot in my life. Still do. But I've never gone back to Beaver Lake. And I don't think I ever will. I don't care if it was just bad timing or if someone cleaned it up since then. That place felt wrong. Something had poisoned it. And it wasn't just the lake. It was like the whole area had gone quiet, like nature had given up on it. That was the only camping trip I ever ended early. And honestly, I don't regret it. Some places just feel like they're telling you to leave. And when they do, you listen. I started renting out the downstairs unit of my house on Airbnb back in early 2021. I live alone in a quiet neighborhood outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. The house is split level, and the downstairs has its own entrance, kitchenette, bathroom, and living area. It's separated enough that I hardly ever hear or see my guests unless they need something. It was extra money, and since I work remotely, I figured it made sense. For the first year, things were uneventful. A lot of couples on road trips, a few solo hikers passing through. I never had any serious issues. I kept the key lockbox outside, left a welcome note with the Wi-Fi password, and that was usually the end of my involvement. In October of 2023, I got a booking from a man named Calvin. No last name, just Calvin. He had no profile picture, and the bio section just said, traveling for work. He booked 5 nights, paid up front, and sent one message that just said, we'll arrive late. That should have raised red flags, but I'd had other guests like that. Some people just don't care to chit-chat. So I cleaned the unit like usual, set everything up, and didn't think much more about it. He arrived around 11:30 p.m. I only knew because I heard a car pull into the gravel driveway, headlights sweeping across the side of my house, and then a car door slamming. I was upstairs in bed. I peeked through the curtains and saw a man getting out of a dark gray sedan. He was tall and wore a black hoodie with a hood up. He didn't have any luggage, which I thought was weird for a 5-night stay. Just a plastic grocery bag in one hand and something bulky under his arm, like a rolled-up jacket or maybe a laptop case. He let himself in with the code, and I heard the door shut. That first night, nothing happened. I didn't hear anything from downstairs. The next morning, his car was still parked outside, but the blinds downstairs were shut tight. By the second day, I started noticing little things. I went out to get the mail and saw that my side gate, which leads to the backyard, was unlatched. I never use it. It's a heavy wooden gate that sticks and squeaks like hell. You have to really pull it to open it. I figure maybe he'd gone out back for some air. The yard's technically part of the listing, and it's not locked off. But on the third day, things got more strange. I was working in my upstairs office, and I kept hearing these soft thumps like something being dropped on the floor below. Not once or twice, but over and over in a weird rhythm. Thump, pause, thump, thump, long pause, thump. Like someone was dropping a ball or maybe pacing and dragging something. I went down the stairs and stood by the inside door that leads to the unit. I didn't knock, just listened. It went quiet as soon as I got close. Later that day, I checked the backyard again. The gate was wide open. There were shoe prints in the dirt leading around the side of the house. Someone had walked the entire perimeter of my home. They were my prints. I messaged him through the app asking if everything was okay. No reply. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my own front doorknob rattling. It was faint, but I live alone. There's no mistaking that sound. I didn't get up immediately. I just laid there listening, trying to convince myself it was the wind. But then I heard the wood creak on my front porch. It's an old deck, and it groans under any weight. I got up and crept toward the front door. The porch light was on. There was no one there. I stood in silence for a long time. Then I stepped out and looked around. No sign of anyone. But I noticed that the motion sensor light by the side of the house, the one that faces the backyard, was on. That meant someone had walked past it recently. It doesn't stay lit for long. 30 seconds, maybe a minute. I stayed up the rest of the night. I didn't hear anything else. The next morning, his car was gone. Around noon, he messaged me for the first time since arriving. It just said, "Do you have a ladder I can use?" That was it. No greeting. No explanation. I didn't respond. I was getting a bad feeling about the whole situation, so I called Airbnb to report unusual behavior. They told me I could cancel the rest of the stay if I felt unsafe, and they'd handle the refund. I told them I'd wait one more night and see. That night, I locked everything. Windows, inside doors, even slid a chair under the doorknob that led to the basement unit. I didn't hear anything until around 3 a.m. That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs inside my house. Not the outside ones. The stairs that go from my kitchen down to the locked basement door. The one I'd put a chair against. I froze in bed, just laid there, holding my breath. I heard one soft creak, then another, like someone was trying to move quietly. Then a sound like a body pressing gently against the door. A slight vibration in the wood. I stayed perfectly still. After a long minute, the sound stopped. I didn't sleep after that. When the sun came up, I grabbed a small screwdriver and quietly unscrewed the inside doorknob to the basement unit. I didn't want someone trying to unlock it from the other side, even by accident. That's when I saw something strange. The metal strike plate on the door frame, the part the latch goes into, was bent slightly outward, like someone had tried to force it open from the other side. The chair had shifted maybe an inch. Not much, but enough to know it had been pushed against. I went around to the outside and knocked on the guest door. No answer. I waited 5 minutes, then used my key and went in. The unit was a mess. Not destroyed, but weird. All the blinds were shut, all the lights off. He had taken the couch cushions off and arranged them into a kind of mattress on the floor. There were food wrappers everywhere, mostly protein bars and jerky. The trash can was overflowing and the smell was awful. In the kitchenette sink, I found a rusted pair of needle-nose pliers. Not mine. On the table was a small black notebook with no cover. I flipped through it. Every page was filled with weird symbols, like tally marks and crude sketches of floor plans. One of them looked almost exactly like the layout of my house. I called Airbnb again. I told them I was officially canceling the booking and that I wanted someone to flag his profile. They said they'd escalated. He didn't come back that night. 2 days later, I checked a local crime blotter online just to see if anything came up under his name. I didn't find Calvin, but I did see a short article about a break-in at a home 2 towns over. The suspect was described as a tall male in dark clothing. They found crude drawings of the house's layout in a notebook left behind at the scene. The homeowner had been away, but the suspect had broken in, eaten food, and moved items around before leaving. They still hadn't caught him. I never got a last name. Airbnb removed the profile shortly after. His car never came back, and I never saw him again. But for weeks after, I kept finding little things around the outside of my house. A cigarette, but left near my back steps. A length of wire tucked behind the garbage bins. Once, I found a paper napkin under my doormat, folded in half and completely blank. I stopped renting the place out after that. I still live in a house, but I installed cameras, changed every lock, and boarded up the side gate. Sometimes, even now, when the wind dies down at night and everything is dead quiet, I hear the stairs creak. And I listen, heart pounding, for that slow, steady pressure of someone testing the door. So far, it hasn't come again, but I never sleep all the way through the night anymore. My girlfriend and I rented a cabin up in Colorado that February. She had found it online, one of those quiet, snowy spots that look like they're pulled straight out of a postcard. It was just the 2 of us, tucked away deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and hills blanketed in snow. We both wanted a break from people and noise and everything else that came with city life. No cell service, no neighbors, no roads for miles. It was exactly what we were looking for. The first 2 days were perfect. We got in just before sunset on a Friday, the sun going down behind the trees as we parked the car on a small plowed path that led to the cabin. Inside, the place was simple but cozy. Wooden floors, old couches, a fireplace with stacked logs beside it. There were books on a shelf, a coffee maker that took forever to brew anything, and a tiny radio that barely picked up a signal. Everything creaked when you walked, and there's only one bedroom, but it felt like enough. We spent those first 2 days doing nothing much, drinking hot chocolate, playing cards, cooking simple meals on the tiny stovetop, and reading. The snow kept falling in soft waves outside. There were big windows that looked out at the forest, and we'd sit there for hours watching the trees sway. At night, the whole world outside turned black, like someone had painted over it. Not even moonlight got through the clouds. All you could hear was the wind pushing against the cabin. That third morning, I got up early. She was still asleep. I was just planning to step outside, stretch my legs, get a breath of cold air. I opened the front door and walked onto the porch. The snow had fallen overnight. Not heavy, just a thin, fresh layer, maybe an inch or 2 thick. That's when I saw the footprints. They were clear as day. A single set of tracks leading from the woods. The tree line started maybe 50 feet from the back of the cabin and heading straight toward the cabin's back window. Then they turned around and went back the same way. Except the window they went to was our bedroom. And I was sure, absolutely sure, they hadn't been there the night before. We both stepped outside before bed. I'd smoked a cigarette out front. There was nothing in the snow then. That light layer had to have fallen after we went to sleep, which meant someone had walked up to our cabin in the middle of the night. Recently, I walked around back, following the prints. They were narrow, longer than mine, and spaced out like someone had been walking slowly. Not running, not stumbling, just calm, slow steps. They stopped at the window, and I could see faint smudges on the glass, like the greasy outline of a forehead and a nose pressed against it. No cracks, no fingerprints, just vague face-shaped smears. I didn't wake her. I didn't want to scare her, but something about it put a weight in my chest I couldn't shake. I spent most of the day just sitting inside, staring out the windows. We kept the fire going, ate lunch in silence. I didn't mention the footprints, not then. She seemed so relaxed, and I didn't want to ruin it unless I had to. That night, I made sure both locks on the door were turned. I pushed one of the chairs under the front knob too, just for extra peace of mind. I even checked all the windows, pulled every curtain shut, and left the lights off after dinner. The dark felt heavy, like it was pressing in from all sides. She fell asleep easily, curled up under the thick comforter. I stayed up, just listening. For a long time, there was nothing but the soft cracking of the fire as it burned down to embers. Then, sometime after 3 a.m., I heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps, slow, steady in the snow. They weren't coming from the front. I knew the sound of that path. These were coming from the side, near the back wall, the side where the bedroom was. I didn't move. I just lay there, eyes open in the dark, barely breathing. The steps kept coming, one after the other. Then they stopped, right outside the wall behind our bed, close enough that I could feel it. Whoever was had walked right up to the cabin again and just stopped. I waited. Minutes passed. No more sounds. No walking away. No crunch of steps fading into the woods. Nothing. Just silence. At some point I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, it was morning. The fire was completely out and she was still asleep beside me. I got up quietly, put on my boots and jacket, and stepped outside. The snow was fresh again. Not much had fallen, just a thin dusting over everything. But it was enough to show new tracks. They came from the tree line again, the same direction. They walked right up to the cabin, to the exact same spot as the night before. But there were no tracks leading away. The footprints just ended at the wall. No turnaround, no retreat, nothing. I walked a few feet back and forth, trying to see if maybe the wind had covered the return path. But there was no sign of anything, not even a partial print. Just a single trail coming up from the trees to the bedroom wall. And then nothing. I stood there for a long time, just staring at them. They were barefoot. Whoever had come to the cabin in the middle of the night had walked through the snow without shoes. Their prints were detailed enough that I could see the individual toes, the arch of the foot. The skin must have been freezing. It didn't make sense. When she woke up, I finally told her everything. About the prints the morning before, the smudges on the glass, the sounds I heard at night. She didn't laugh. She didn't brush it off. She just looked at me and said we should leave. We packed in under 10 minutes. No breakfast. We didn't even bother cleaning up. Just threw everything into the bags, shut off the gas heater, and left. We didn't talk much on the drive back. I kept looking in the rearview mirror like I expected someone to be standing in the road behind us. Nothing ever appeared, but I couldn't shake the feeling. A few days later, back home, I went through the photos I'd taken. Most of them were just normal shots of the trees, the porch, her reading by the fire. But I had snapped pictures of the prints, too. Several angles. I still have them saved. Every time I look at them, I feel that same pit in my stomach. The shape of the foot, the way the toes curl slightly into the snow. You could tell they weren't running. They weren't stumbling. Whoever was walked slowly, calmly, and left no trace of leaving. I looked into missing persons in the area, checked forums, tried to find explanations, but nothing fits. No shelters nearby, no drifters reported, no hikers lost that week. And who the hell walks barefoot through snow-covered woods in the middle of the night? I haven't gone back to the woods since. Neither has she. We don't talk about it anymore. But the photos are still there, buried in a folder on my hard drive. I don't open them often, but when I do, I always find myself staring at the prints for way too long. Every time, they look more human than I want them to. And every time, I remind myself, whoever made them stood outside our bedroom wall and never walked away. In 2004, my girlfriend and I decided to get away for the weekend and rented a small, cheap cabin on a lake. We wanted something quiet, secluded, just us and nature. The place we found was about a 2-hour drive from the city, way out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by pine trees, and sitting just a few steps from the water. It wasn't anything fancy, definitely not luxurious, but it had the basic stuff: a kitchen, a bathroom, a little living room, a couple of worn-out beds, and the main selling point for her, a fireplace. She was obsessed with it. She had this thing about fireplaces because apparently her childhood home had one, and when her parents divorced and sold the place, she never got over it. So she was unusually excited to sit in front of this tiny old fireplace like it was some big life milestone. When we got there that Friday afternoon, I brought in the bags while she walked through the cabin, giggling and clapping like a little kid. She kept talking about how she wanted to make s'mores and maybe even fall asleep in front of the fire like in a movie. I was just happy to be away from everything. It was about 4 p.m. when we were settled in. She started begging me to start a fire right then and there, but I told her we should wait until later when it gets dark. I suggested we go fishing first, just enjoy the lake while we had daylight. She wasn't thrilled, but agreed after I promised to make s'mores that night and build the fire exactly how she wanted it. But she made me at least get the firewood ready. So I dragged one of the bundles inside and unwrapped it right there on the living room floor. While I was pulling the logs apart and stacking them next to the hearth, something shot out from inside the bundle. At first, I thought it was a worm or maybe a mouse, but then I saw the long, thin, squirming body, a snake. A milk snake, although I didn't know that at the time. It had red and black and white rings on it, which looked pretty damn dangerous to me. I dropped the log I was holding and jumped back like someone had pulled a gun. My girlfriend screamed louder than I've ever heard anyone scream in my life. The snake didn't make any noise, but slithered quickly across the floor, disappeared behind a dusty chair in the corner, and was just gone. We ran out of that cabin so fast, it was like we were being chased. We stopped when we got to the dock. Catching our breath, both of us freaked out beyond reason. I had no idea if that snake was poisonous, and we were far away from anything resembling a hospital. I pulled out my phone and left this panicked message on the voicemail of the rental office, telling them there was a deadly snake in the cabin and that we needed someone to come get it out. I didn't get an answer, just a machine, but I hoped someone would hear it soon. My girlfriend refused to go back inside, and honestly, I didn't want to either. To calm her down, I suggested we take the boat out onto the lake for a while. The sky was starting to turn golden from the setting sun, and the water was calm, smooth as glass. We floated out there for about an hour, letting the wind and silence settle our nerves. After a while, she started to relax. I even got her to laugh a little. The fresh air helped both of us. When we came back, I noticed something strange. The screen door to the cabin was now shut. I had left it open when we ran out. I was sure of it. I figured maybe one of the maintenance guys had come by while we were out and taken care of the snake. I didn't see any cars or trucks nearby, but I convinced myself that the problem had been handled. We went inside cautiously. I poked around the living room first, checked under the chair and around the fireplace, but I didn't see anything. No sign of the snake. I decided to go ahead and build the fire to keep my promise. She sat down in front of it on the old braided rug and watched the flames start to grow. Eventually, she leaned her head on my shoulder, and we just sat there, the warm flicker of the fire lighting up the wood-paneled walls. For a moment, everything felt all right again. We roasted marshmallows, made s'mores, and even talked about maybe coming back in the winter when the lake froze over. It was one of those rare, peaceful nights. But that peace didn't last. Sometime around 8 or 9 p.m., we both heard a sound. It came from a hallway that led to the bathroom and back bedrooms. At first it was faint, like dragging feet or something heavy shuffling. Then it got clearer. It sounded like claws tapping on the wood floor, quick and deliberate, almost like those clicking noises the raptors made in Jurassic Park. I sat up immediately. My heart jumped into my throat. She looked at me with wide eyes. The first thought that shot into my head was that the snake had somehow grown legs. Or maybe it had never been a snake to begin with. Maybe it was something worse. I grabbed a blanket and the fire poker. The poker was this heavy iron rod with a twisted handle and a sharp hook at the end, almost like the Saints football team's logo. My idea was to throw the blanket over whatever it was and beat it into the floor until it stopped moving. I moved slowly down the hallway, gripping the poker tight in one hand and the blanket in the other. The hallway was mostly dark, with just a bit of light flickering from the fireplace behind me. As I stepped closer to the bathroom, I saw a large shape crouched in the shadows near the doorway. It was too big to be a snake. It looked feathery, hunched and round. Before I could make sense of what I was seeing, the thing launched forward. It came at me with speed and fury. I fell backwards and scrambled into the living room. My girlfriend screamed behind me. The thing didn't stop. It charged in after me, flapping and shrieking. In the firelight, I finally saw what it was. A turkey. A full-grown, massive, puffed up wild turkey. It was hissing, its wings flared out, its chest puffed, and its eyes like black beads, angry and focused. It must have gotten into the cabin while we were out on the boat, maybe chasing after the snake. It was now completely nuts, charging around the room, knocking over chairs, and smashing into walls like it wanted to fight everyone in the house. I swung the poker at it, catching it once in the side. It screamed and flapped harder. It came at me again, pecking and clawing. I hit it again, this time harder, square in the body. It stumbled but kept coming. Finally, I swung the poker like a bat and caught it across the head with the hooked end. It was a loud crack. The turkey dropped like a sack of wet cement, twitched once, then lay still. We stood there in silence, staring at it. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. I wrapped the turkey in the same blanket and carried it outside. I put it in the bed of my truck and drove straight to the rental office, which was still open but had only one guy behind the counter, a long-haired dude who looked like he spent most of his days half-stoned. I told him what happened, thanked him for removing the snake, and handed him the turkey. He looked confused but didn't say much. The next day, I got a call from him. He told me he'd finally listened to my message from the day before. No one had gone out to the cabin. No one had removed the snake. But while cleaning the turkey, he said his brother was planning to cook it. They found the snake in its stomach, swallowed whole. That turkey had come into the cabin chasing the snake and probably caught it while we were out on the lake. That's why it had been in the bathroom. And that's why it went completely insane. It was probably still half crazed from the fight. I didn't know turkeys ate snakes. I didn't even know they could kill them. So yeah, turns out the turkey saved us from the snake. We just didn't know at the time. We packed up that morning and didn't stay the second night. On the drive back, my girlfriend said she still loved the fireplace, but maybe next time we should try a hotel with central heating. I didn't argue. And now, every time I see a turkey, on TV, in the store, wherever, I think about that night, that fire, and that damn demon bird charging out of the dark like it wanted my soul. And now you know, turkeys eat snakes. It was the middle of summer, a few years back, and me and 3 of my closest mates decided we'd do a bit of wild camping. Nothing fancy. Just a cheap tent, some sleeping bags, a cooler full of cheap food and warm drinks, and a big open field somewhere in the countryside of England. I can't even remember the name of the place we camped exactly, just that it was quiet, way out from town, and surrounded by waist-high grass with a line of trees way off in the distance. The sort of place where no one would bother you, and you could stay up late, drink, talk rubbish, and not worry about anything or anyone. We got there in the late afternoon, after stopping by a petrol station to grab snacks and drinks. We parked just off the side of the narrow country road, carried our stuff through the field, and found a fairly flat bit of ground to pitch the tent. It took a while to set it up. None of us were exactly outdoorsmen. Holes kept bending, and no one read the instructions. But after about an hour of shouting and swearing, we got it up. It was a big dome-style tent, cheap and cheerful, just enough room for the 4 of us if we lay side by side. No real space to move around inside, but we didn't plan on doing much except sleeping in there. That night was normal. We sat around on our folding chairs, passed around a speaker playing old rock songs, shared a few beers, told stories, laughed, and just enjoyed being out in the open. The air had that warm, dry smell of grass and dirt, and there were no streetlights, no cars, no background noise at all. Just wind rustling through the grass and the occasional distant sound of some bird or animal out in the woods. It felt peaceful, like one of those memories you think back on years later with a smile. Eventually, the temperature dropped a bit and we started getting tired. We zipped up the tent, got into our sleeping bags, and lay there talking quietly for a bit. Like idiots, we were telling each other scary stories. You know the sort: ghosts, haunted houses, murderers in the woods. I remember at one point, one of the lads mentioned a story about an old headless farmer or something, some dumb thing he claimed to have read online. We all laughed it off, of course. We were grown men, or at least we thought we were. But still, you know how it is when you're lying in the dark with nothing but a thin layer of fabric between you and the world. Everything feels a bit more intense. We must have drifted off sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning. I was just getting into a light sleep, half awake, half out of it. when I heard one of my friends, James, let out a sharp, panic scream. Not like a startled yelp. I mean a full-on scream, like the kind that makes your whole body go tense instantly. I sat bolt upright, heart hammering, sleep completely gone. The other two shot up too, all of us disoriented, squinting in the dark, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. James was sitting up in his sleeping bag, wide-eyed, breathing hard, sweat running down his forehead, even though it was cool. He kept pointing to the back corner of the tent and muttering. There was a head, just a head, floating. None of us knew what to say. We were too confused, too freaked out by how genuinely terrified he looked. He wasn't messing about. He wasn't laughing. His voice was shaking. You could see the whites of his eyes darting around the dark tent like he was expecting something to jump at him. He said the head was just there, in the corner, not attached to a body. Just a man's head, hanging in the air about a foot or so off the ground, like it was lying on an invisible pillow. He said the face was looking straight at him, eyes open and wide, mouth moving as if it was speaking, but no sound, just moving lips. We all looked. Nothing was there. Just our bags, a couple of shoes, someone's water bottle. The tent was dead silent, but that didn't matter. Once someone plants an image like that in your head, it sticks. I couldn't stop picturing it. The shape, the expression, the mouth moving without sound. And the more I thought about it, the less I could convince myself it was just a dream or a trick of the light. James was shaking. We had to calm him down. But truth is, none of us were okay after that. No one wanted to lie back down. No one wanted to turn off the torch. We just sat there in that cramped little tent, backs against the fabric, knees pulled up to our chests, staring at that empty corner like it was going to sprout something awful. The air inside started feeling hotter, like we'd all been holding our breath for too long. Outside, the field was dead quiet. Not even the wind moved anymore. No insects, no birds, nothing. Just this awful stillness pressing in from all sides. No one spoke. For hours. I remember checking my phone at 4:17 a.m. It felt like time had frozen. All of us were waiting for something, some noise, some movement. But nothing happened. Not a thing. As soon as the sky started to lighten, just the faintest hint of blue over the tops of the trees, we were up. No one said a word. We didn't even pack properly. We just shoved everything into bags, collapsed the tent in a rush without folding it, and carried it all back to the car like we were being chased. I remember looking back at the field one last time, just to check, I guess. There was nothing, just grass, a few broken beer bottles, our flattened patch of ground. We drove home in silence. The radio was off. Everyone looked tired and pale. No one talked about it for a long time. Later, weeks later, we tried to explain it away. Maybe James was half asleep and hallucinated it. Maybe a shadow played tricks on his eyes. Maybe it was the mix of alcohol, tiredness, and ghost stories. But even saying all that, none of us really believed it. Because it wasn't just what he saw. It was how real his fear was. How it affected all of us. We never went camping together again. Not once. That was the last trip. And we definitely never told ghost stories around the tent after that. It started with an accident. I had booked an Airbnb in a small town just outside Portland for a long weekend to get away from work. I work in tech, long hours, always in front of screen, and lately I'd been feeling like my brain was starting to melt from the inside out. I needed quiet, fresh air, and no meetings for 3 days. I picked this place because it was cheap, remote, and looked clean. It wasn't a cabin or anything special. Just a small guest house behind someone's home that was listed as cozy, private, and newly renovated. The reviews were positive. Seemed safe enough. I got there late Friday evening. The directions the host gave me were simple, but I still had to drive up this long, narrow gravel road through tall trees for what felt like forever before I saw the main house. It was dark already, and there weren't many lights around. The guest house was around back, like she said. It looked decent. A little one-story building with a porch light and a small deck. No one came out to greet me, which I preferred. The place inside was minimal. A small kitchenette, a couch, a coffee table, a queen bed in the corner, and a bathroom. Everything smelled clean, but like overly clean, like the scent of bleach was still lingering in the air. I thought nothing of it. I dumped my bag near the couch, plugged in my phone, and lay down for a bit. That first night was uneventful. I made some noodles I brought, watched a movie I downloaded, and went to bed early. I didn't hear anything unusual, but the silence itself was kind of unsettling. No cars, no people, not even wind. Just dead quiet. I told myself I wanted this, peace and quiet, and forced myself to enjoy it. The next morning, I woke up feeling well rested. I made coffee, went for a short walk near the property, and saw nothing out of the ordinary. The host's main house looked shut, curtains drawn, no car in the driveway. I figured she wasn't home. Fine by me. I spent most of the day inside reading and journaling, just trying to clear my head. I didn't even go into town. That night, I stayed up a little later. Around midnight, I went to brush my teeth. That's when I noticed something strange. The medicine cabinet above the sink had scratches near the bottom of the mirror, like someone had tried to pry it open. I touched the edge and realized it was loose, like the whole mirror part could come off. I gently pulled on it, and sure enough, it popped open like a hidden compartment. Behind it was a narrow gap in the wall, maybe 10 inches deep. Inside there were things. At first, I thought it was junk, but I pulled them out one by one. An old disposable camera, a gold ring, a Polaroid photo, and a spiral notebook with a rubber band wrapped tightly around it. I laid them all out on the bathroom sink, staring at them. The photo was of a woman, standing in what looked like the same guest house I was in, but the walls looked different, older. She was smiling, holding a coffee mug. The ring looked like a wedding ring. The notebook was what got me most. It was packed full of entries, no dates, just lines and lines of someone's handwriting. The pages were stiff, like they had been exposed to moisture at some point. I shouldn't have read it, I know that. But I did. The entries started out normal, like a diary. A woman talking about how she booked the Airbnb to get away from her husband, how she wanted to clear her mind. Then things started to shift. She mentioned hearing footsteps outside the guest house at night. She wrote about waking up and finding the front door unlocked. She thought someone was coming in while she slept. The last few pages were frantic, the handwriting messy and slanted. She said someone had taken her phone, that she wasn't sure if she was being drugged. Then nothing, just blank pages after that. I stood there for a long time, not knowing what to do. I felt a tight knot in my stomach, like I had just read something I was never meant to find. I packed the items back into the compartment and shut it. I couldn't sleep that night. I left the light on and sat on the couch, staring at the door. Around 3 a.m., I heard something. It was the soft creak of it outside. I froze. It was faint but unmistakable. I stood up slowly and moved toward the window, gently pulling the curtain back just an inch. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But I didn't feel safe anymore. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just nerves that I had let the notebook get into my head. I packed my things and decided to cut the trip short. As I was leaving, I glanced back at the guest house and something clicked. The porch light wasn't on. I remembered turning it on the first night. I always left lights on when I traveled, but now it was off, and I knew I didn't turn it off. My hand started to shake on the steering wheel as I backed out and drove away down that gravel road, heart racing the entire way. Back home, I tried to forget about it, but 2 weeks later, I couldn't resist checking the Airbnb listing again. The guest house was gone, completely removed, not even in the unavailable section. I tried to find the host's name, nothing. I checked my email for the confirmation. It was gone, no trace of the receipt. I still had the text instructions she sent me though, and the address. I Googled it. The property came up, but it was listed as abandoned. A real estate website said it had been on the market for 3 years with no buyers. The house and guest house were supposedly empty. I triple-checked the photos. It was the same place. I didn't know what to make of it. I called the local county office and pretended to be a potential buyer, just to get more info. The woman I spoke to told me that the property had been in probate after the owner passed away a few years ago. No one had been living there. No one was renting it out. She said I must have the wrong address. I didn't. I knew I didn't. A week later, a package showed up at my door. No return address. Inside was the spiral notebook, the one I had found. I never told anyone about it, not even my friends. But there it was, sitting in my hands again. I opened it, and now there were new pages. Not many, just a few. The handwriting was mine. I don't remember writing them. They were just short paragraphs, fragments, saying things like, "Don't trust the reviews," and "It looks different during the day." And one line repeated 3 times, "You were supposed to forget." I threw it out. I don't care how crazy it sounds. I burned it in a steel bucket in my backyard and poured water over the ashes. Then I deleted every Airbnb email I had, changed my passwords, and canceled 2 upcoming trips. I didn't want to go anywhere alone anymore. It's been almost 6 months since that weekend. I haven't heard anything else, haven't gotten any more strange packages. I sleep fine now mostly, but sometimes when I brush my teeth, I find myself staring at the medicine cabinet, just staring at it like I'm waiting for it to open. I haven't booked an Airbnb since. When I was a kid, my dad and I went fishing every summer. Same spot every time. A set of campgrounds about a 4-hour drive from where we lived. It was mostly tents and RVs, but there were 6 old cabins there too, lined up in a row off a dirt road, not far from the lake. We always stayed in cabin 3 or 4. My dad liked cabin 4 best because it was close enough to the lake trail, but far enough from the communal fire pit and showers that you didn't hear people too much at night. After he died, I didn't go back for a couple years. Just didn't feel right without him. When I was 19, I finally decided to go again. Alone this time. I told myself it was about fishing, maybe thinking back on some memories, but honestly I think I just wanted to see if it felt the same. I booked cabin 4. Nothing fancy, just an old wooden structure with a rusty stove, a thin mattress on a creaky bed frame, a bare light bulb on the ceiling, and a toilet with a curtain instead of a door. The smell inside was always the same, damp wood and something like old matches. Familiar and a little sad. The cabins were numbered 1 through 6. Cabin 6 was 2 doors down from mine, right at the end of the line, past the overgrown trail to the river. I remembered it from when I was younger because it had been boarded up even back then. My dad had said there was a fire in there once, and no one had stayed in it since. He didn't talk about it much, and I never really asked. The windows were covered with thick plywood, the door chained shut with a rusted lock. Every year, it looked more abandoned. The first 2 nights were quiet. I fished during the day, read a little, cooked on the stove when the fire pit was too much trouble. There were only 2 other cabins occupied that week, both on the other end, near cabin 1. I barely saw the people, just caught glimpses of them walking down toward the lake in the mornings. The nights were what I came for. Dead silent, except for the wind in the trees and the occasional creak of a squirrel on the roof or something scurrying through the bushes. On my second night, I got up to use the toilet around 1 in the morning. It was cold. I remember standing there, half asleep, staring at the wood grain on the cabin wall when something caught my eye. A soft light. I turned and looked through the side window, the one that faced down the line toward cabin 6. There was a light in the window. At first, I thought it might have been a reflection or something. I blinked and leaned closer. No mistake. It was faint, but it was definitely there. A soft yellow glow shining behind one of the plywood boards that didn't quite sit flush against the frame. I stood there staring for at least 30 seconds, not breathing much, just trying to figure it out. There was no power in that cabin, and it had been sealed for years. The next morning, I walked to the main office near the trailhead. The groundskeeper was a guy in his 50s with a gut and a permanent frown. I asked him, real casual, if anyone was staying in cabin 6. He looked up from the paper he was reading and shook his head. "That one's been empty a long time," he said. "No power in there either." "What?" I told him I thought I saw a light, but he just shrugged. "Probably the moon. Nothing in there but ash and broken glass." I nodded and left, but something about the way he said it, too quick, too final, put me off. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept looking out the window every 20 minutes or so, but cabin 6 stayed dark, completely black. Then came the third night. I was lying in bed, just staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind. It was cold again, and I had wrapped my sleeping bag around myself, trying to stay warm. I remember glancing at the stove and thinking I should have lit a fire earlier. Then I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Not on the door, on the wall. The back wall, the one that faced cabin 6. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't loud. more like someone tapping slowly with their knuckles or maybe a stick. I didn't move at first. My heart felt like it had just dropped into my stomach. I sat there, frozen, staring at the wall. After maybe 30 seconds, I pulled the covers off and stood up. My legs were stiff and my mouth felt dry. I walked slowly to the window and pushed one of the slats on the blinds just enough to peek through. A figure stood between the cabins. Not moving, not swaying, just standing there. I couldn't see a face. It looked like a man, tall, broad shoulders, maybe wearing a jacket. He was about 20 feet away, standing on a narrow strip of dirt that ran behind the cabins. Right outside the window, I stared for a while, then finally shouted, "Hey!" The figure turned. I didn't hear footsteps, but walked slowly back toward cabin 6. Not in a hurry, just turned and went. It disappeared into the shadows near the boarded-up front door. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the chair near the stove with my pocket knife in my hand and a flashlight on the table. I kept looking at the wall where the knocks came from. I kept thinking about how the figure didn't run. Like it wasn't surprised. Like it knew I'd be watching. The sun came up around 5. I waited until 7 to step outside. The air was cold and smelled like wet pine. I walked slowly around the side of my cabin toward the back wall. The dirt between cabin 4 and cabin 6 was hard-packed, but had some pine needles and leaves scattered over it. No clear footprints. Then I saw it. Something stuck to the wall right below the window. A photo, black and white, curled at the edges from moisture. It was stuck there with a nail, an old, bent nail like the kind you'd find at a barn wall. I pulled it off and looked closer. It was a picture of me, sleeping. The angle was from inside the cabin. I could see the bed, the corner of the stove, even my backpack lying on the floor. I was curled in the sleeping bag, facing the wall, mouth slightly open. It wasn't a copy of an old photo or anything. It was recent. My hair was the same. I had a bandage on my thumb from when I'd cut myself gutting a trout the day before. It was me, from this trip. I checked the cabin from top to bottom, every inch, under the bed, inside the stove, behind the curtain near the toilet. There weren't many places to hide, but I checked anyway. The windows were locked from the inside. The door too. There were no signs of anyone coming in or out. I packed up and left before noon. I didn't stop to tell the groundskeeper. I didn't even take the food out of the stove. I drove straight home, checking my mirrors every few minutes like I expected someone to be following me. That was 2 years ago. I haven't been back since. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I heard those 3 knocks again. Sometimes I dream about the photo. I still have it. I keep it in a drawer at the bottom of my desk. I don't show it to anyone. I don't want to explain it. I don't even want to look at it again. But I haven't thrown it away. I just want to know who took it and how they got inside. The cabin wasn't much, just a small weathered box sitting on a rise in the middle of thick Tennessee woods. We found it online for cheap, 3 nights for friends, and not much else. It had power, running water, 2 bedrooms, a busted but working fireplace, and a porch that sagged like an old man's back. None of us cared. We were looking for quiet, a place to drink, laugh, and get off our phones for a while. We were all 20-something, tired of jobs and cities and always being connected. The first night passed like any camping trip. We grilled burgers, drank beer, played cards, told dumb stories. The wind rustled through the trees, and the nearest house was miles away. No cell signal, which we actually liked. The only way we could call out was over the landline phone in the kitchen, one of those yellowed push-button ones from the 90s. We joked about it being a murder cabin, half expecting a bear to show up or something, but really, it just felt old and quiet. The only thing that fell off was the smell under the porch, wet wood and something musty, but that didn't seem weird for a place like this. Second night, just after dinner, I dropped my flashlight through the gaps in the porch boards. It was one of those rubber ones with a heavy battery pack that clattered like hell when it hit the ground. I crouched down, tried to reach for it, but my fingers couldn't grab it. So I went around the side and ducked under the porch. It was cramped. Cobwebs brushed my arms, and I could feel dirt sticking to my palms. The flashlight beam danced over dead leaves and empty bottles someone must have left years ago. And that's when I saw the glow. It was soft and bluish, just a few feet away, tucked against the wall of the cabin. A phone. I froze. It was turned on. The screen was lit, and the camera app was open. There was no lock screen, just a camera view. My flashlight reflected off the glass. I grabbed it without thinking, half expecting it to be a dead, useless shell, but it was warm in my hand. I backed out and showed the guys. We sat on the living room floor and went through it. The phone wasn't password protected. Nothing fancy about it. Old Android, cracked screen, 27% battery left. The gallery opened right up. The photos were recent. All of them. The first few were random shots of the woods, the porch, some blurry night shots. But then they changed. There were pictures of us. Not taken from inside, not ones we'd taken ourselves. They were taken from outside the cabin, through the windows. Most of them were close-ups of our faces, zoomed in or from low angles. The kind of angles you get if you were crawling or crouched. One of me laughing with a beer in my hand. One of Caleb grilling. One of Jake brushing his teeth in the window. All taken without us knowing. All from under the porch or outside the windows. Then we found the last one. It was a 10-second video. We played it. The sound was muffled, but you could hear us talking, laughing, silverware clinking on plates. The video was shot through the living room window. You could see the four of us sitting at the table, eating dinner. None of us had seen or heard anyone. We locked the doors. All of them. There weren't many, just the front and back, and a window in the bathroom that didn't quite shut all the way. We dragged a table in front of the back door and kept the fireplace poker close. We turned off all the lights inside and lit a few candles. Every time one of us got up to use the bathroom or grab something from the kitchen, the rest would flinch. We felt like rats inside a glass cage, being watched. We took shifts. Jake and Caleb stayed up first while I tried to sleep on the couch. I couldn't. My stomach wouldn't calm down, and every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone crouched just outside the window, face pressed against the glass. I finally drifted off a little after midnight. Caleb woke me up at around 1. He whispered, "There's someone out back." That sentence hit me like a slap. I sat up slowly, heart already hammering. The cabin was dead quiet, except for the crackling of the dying fire. I followed Caleb to the back window, and he pointed. There was a figure standing at the tree lean. Not moving, just standing there. Not close, but close enough to see the outline. Could have been a man. Could have been wearing a hood. I couldn't tell. The trees behind him were thick, and the moonlight wasn't strong enough to make out much. We stared for what felt like 10 minutes. It never moved. It just watched. Caleb whispered, "I'm going out there." I told him not to, but he already had the poker in his hand and was walking to the door before I could stop him. He didn't run, but he moved fast. I followed him out. The cold slapped me across the face. We both charged toward the spot, yelling. But there was nothing. When we reached the tree lean, it was empty. The ground was covered in dry leaves and pine needles, and there wasn't a single footprint, not even broken branches. Just silence. We turned our flashlights in every direction, calling out, but no one answered. We stood out there for another 10 minutes, swinging the beams in circles, before we finally gave up and went back in. No one slept after that. We sat around the cold fireplace, bags under our eyes, checking the windows every few minutes. We waited for the sun. When the sky finally turned pink, we grabbed everything, bags, clothes, coolers, gear, and threw in the back of Jake's SUV. We didn't even clean up. We didn't care about getting the deposit back. We just wanted to get off that mountain. The drive down was long and quiet. The tires crunched over gravel and dirt until we hit the main road. It was only then that we started to breathe normally again. The trees got less dense. The sky opened up. We didn't talk much, just kept glancing at the rearview mirror. About 20 minutes down, my phone buzzed. Somehow, I had a signal again. One new message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. No name, just 10 digits. I opened it. The message said, "Asterisk, you left too soon." I wasn't done yet. Asterisk. My skin went cold. I showed the others. We checked the phone we found. Same number. That was the last straw. We pulled over and smashed the phone on a rock until the screen was just glass dust. We tossed the remains into a creek we passed and drove without stopping until we hit the nearest town. We never went back. We never called the cabin's owner. We never reported it. None of us wanted our names attached to anything like that. We talked about it once, maybe twice after that trip, but mostly we just let it die. But sometimes, late at night, I still wonder how long they were watching us, and if they were already under the porch before we even arrived. It was a warm weekend in late spring when I decided to head out to a biker rally a few hours from home. One of those multi-day events out in the countryside. Cheap beer, loud music, bikes lined up everywhere, and people from all over. The kind of place where you don't need to know anyone, but you'll still find yourself passing around bottles and stories by a fire before the night's over. I drove my car out there. Didn't feel like riding this time, just wanted the convenience of tossing all my gear in the back and not worrying about weather. I brought a decent-sized tent, camp chair, some food, and more than enough beer. Set up camp right next to the car, no more than 15 feet from it. The sun was still up when I finished, and already the place was alive. Music blasting, engines rumbling, laughter echoing over the sound of revving pipes. People were scattered all around the open field, tents popping up at different angles, bikes and cars parked in clusters, fires starting here and there. By nightfall, the party was in full swing. I walked around for a while, ended up talking with a couple guys from Georgia and a group from Indiana. Sat by their fire a while, shared some food and a few beers, then wandered back to my camp. The stars were out, air cool, but not cold. The kind of weather that makes you appreciate the night even more. I sat in my chair a while, watching people still moving around in the distance, then climbed into my tent around 1:30 or so. My tent had mesh windows on the sides and front. I left the rain fly off for airflow, since it wasn't supposed to rain. I zipped the windows closed, but kept the flap open a bit for a breeze. My car was parked just outside, close enough to feel like a little safety barrier, even though I wasn't worried about much. I'm not a small guy, and these rallies, while rowdy, are usually full of good people. Everyone's there for the same reason: ride, drink, have fun, maybe forget about regular life for a bit. I must have been asleep for an hour or so when something woke me. Not a loud sound, but sharp enough to snap me out of deep sleep. I blinked, looked around, and heard it again. Someone was trying to open my car door. Not gently either. It was loud, fast, and aggressive, like someone yanking on a handle over and over. I sat up fast, heart kicking into gear. My head cleared quick. I wasn't drunk, hadn't even had that much to drink earlier. I reached for my pants, but before I even got them on, I leaned toward the window of the tent and unzipped the mesh. I could see the shape of someone standing by my car, not moving, just standing there, one hand still on the door handle. I snapped, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Hey, get the fuck away from my car." He didn't move, just stood there and looked straight at me through the tent. Eyes locked on mine, not blinking. I couldn't make out his face clearly in the dark, but his posture, it was weird. He wasn't scared, surprised, or apologetic, just swaying a little like he was waiting for something. It was like he wanted me to come out. My heart was pounding, and every part of me was screaming to go handle it. I threw on my pants and boots, unzipped the tent, and stepped out into the cool night air. He was still there, just swaying slightly, hands hanging by his sides now, staring. I walked right up to him, keeping my distance by a few feet. I didn't yell again, didn't want to wake up half the camp, but I was ready. If he lunged, I was ready to fight. "What the fuck are you doing?" There was a pause, then a slow, slurred reply. "Trying to get in my car." "Want to sleep." His words were mushy, dragged out, like his mouth wasn't sure how to form them. That's when I really looked at him. Mid-30s maybe, skinny, long messy hair, wearing a leather vest over a shirt that looked like it had been slept in. His eyes weren't angry, they were just empty, glazed. He was pissed drunk, lost, confused, probably didn't even know where he was anymore. I took a breath and tried to bring myself back down. I could feel the heat in my chest, that leftover tension from thinking something worse was about to go down. It didn't take much to imagine how bad it could have gotten if I hadn't waited a second to listen. I could have come flying out of the tent and knocked him out before he said a word. And from the looks of him, that might have seriously hurt the guy. "Your car's not here, man," I said. "Come on, let's go find it." He didn't say anything, just nodded slowly and followed me like a kid who'd gotten caught doing something wrong. We walked around for a few minutes, him stumbling behind me. I asked his name. He didn't answer. I started calling out, anyone know this guy?" Eventually, a guy at another campfire shouted, "Randy, that you?" I waved him over and explained what happened. Turned out the guy's name really was Randy. He'd passed out in a camp chair, woke up confused, wandered off in the dark looking for his car, and ended up at mine. His actual car was 2 rows over, barely visible behind a cluster of bikes and tents. They helped him into the passenger seat and tossed a blanket over him. I went back to my tent, sat in the chair outside for a while, trying to let the adrenaline work its way out. The stars were still out, but the party had quieted down. I looked over at my car a few times. The image of him standing there blankly staring at me stuck with me longer than I expected. Not because he was dangerous, but because for a minute, I really didn't know what was going to happen. I got a couple more hours of sleep and woke up to the smell of bacon and burnt coffee. Classic rally morning. People were up, fires rekindled. Someone was already revving an engine just to be annoying. I sat by the fire with some guys I'd met the night before, eating sausage out of a cast iron pan and trying to shake off the weirdness. Then I saw him, Randy, sober now, eyes a little bloodshot, walking slow like he wasn't sure if he was welcome anywhere. He stopped a few feet away and looked at me. "You the dude that helped me find my car last night?" I stood up. "Yeah." He looked at me for a second, like he wasn't sure what to say next. Then he nodded, looked me up and down, probably realizing how close he came to getting knocked out cold, and said, "Dude, thanks for not fucking me up last night." He handed me a 12-pack of beer. Decent stuff, too. He stuck around for a while after that, sat with us for a bit, shared a few laughs. The kind of guy you'd never expect to cause trouble when he's sober. It stuck with me, though, that whole thing. It could have gone a whole lot different. All it takes is one bad assumption, one fast move. And out there, where there's no cell signal, no security, just a bunch of half-drunk strangers around a fire, there's not a lot between a funny story and a tragedy. I was glad I waited, glad I asked, glad it ended the way it did. We stayed another night. Nothing weird happened after that. Just more beer, more stories, more riding. But I never forgot that moment. The way he stood there, not saying a word, not moving, swaying in the dark. And I never sleep at a rally now without locking my car. I was around 14 when this happened. I was on a summer camping trip with my dad in the mountains of Wyoming. We used to go every year, just the two of us. It was our thing. We'd drive up for hours, hike into the woods, set up camp by some lake or stream, and stay out there for a week or so. This particular trip, though, something happened that I've never forgotten. Not to me, exactly, but to the man camping right next to us. The guy's name was Dave, I think. He was probably in his early 40s, camping alone except for his dog. The dog was this massive, beautiful husky, white and gray fur, those sharp blue eyes, and always full of energy. I remember spending hours throwing sticks for him, running around the trees with him while my dad cooked or read a book in his camp chair. That dog was the friendliest animal I'd ever met. We didn't talk much with Dave. He was nice, polite, but seemed like he wanted quiet. Still, we ended up camping close to each other, maybe 30 or 40 feet apart, tents set up by a bend in the creek that came out of the woods and pooled into a calm little basin. It was the third night of the trip when it happened. We'd all had dinner, said goodnight, and gone into our tents by about 9 or so. My dad was snoring within 15 minutes. I stayed awake longer, reading by flashlight, until eventually I drifted off. The night was calm. I remember that clearly. No wind, no sounds except the crickets and the water moving gently a few yards away. The next morning, I got up early, just as the sky was turning that faint gray-blue color before sunrise. The air was cold, really cold. I unzipped the tent, stepped out, and stretched. I remember hearing Dave moving around already. I saw him near his little fire pit, poking at the coals and pouring water over them. His dog was lying by the tent, alert but relaxed. I walked over to say hi and pet the dog, but I could tell something was off. Dave looked tired, like he hadn't slept at all. There were bags under his eyes, and he was quiet, more than usual. He didn't tell me the full story right away, just mentioned he'd had a rough night. Later, while my dad and I were having breakfast, he walked over and told us what happened. I'll never forget the way he told it. Not in some dramatic way, not with any excitement. He just said it flat, almost like he was still trying to make sense of it himself. He said that sometime during the night, maybe around 1 or 2 in the morning, he'd been fast asleep when he felt a breeze across his face. At first, he thought it was nothing, just the flap of the tent shifting or maybe the wind kicking up. But then he heard a soft, crunching noise. Not loud, just the sound of something stepping on dry pine needles. He sat up slowly, still half asleep, and looked around the tent. That's when he saw the hole. There was a long tear in the side of his tent, right along one of the seams near the bottom, maybe 1.5 feet long. Not huge, but big enough. He blinked, trying to figure out what he was looking at. And then, out of the darkness, a head pushed through the rip. At first, he thought it was his dog. That made sense. Maybe the dog had gotten out of the tent and was trying to come back in. The head looked similar, pointed ears, white and gray fur. But as it came through more, Dave realized something was off. The face was too narrow. The snout was longer. The eyes weren't blue, they were yellow. And then it hit him. This wasn't his dog. It was a wolf. He told us his heart nearly stopped. He'd seen wolves in the wild before, from a distance, but never this close. This one was inches from him. It didn't snarl. It didn't growl. It just looked around the tent, its nose twitching. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it backed out and vanished into the darkness. Dave waited, frozen. He didn't move. He said he was sure the wolf had come to hunt, either him or his dog. He figured the worst was about to happen. After what felt like minutes, though it was probably only 30 seconds, he finally crawled to the tear in the tent and peeked out. He was expecting to see blood, maybe his dog fighting off a pack of wolves. But what he saw stopped him cold. Out there in the dim light of the moon, his husky was running in circles, playing, and chasing after him. Darting through the trees was the wolf. They weren't fighting. They weren't growling. They were playing. The two of them ran back and forth for almost 20 minutes. Sometimes they disappeared into the trees, then came bounding back out, kicking up dirt and leaves. The wolf never looked toward the tents, never showed aggression. It acted like it was just happy to have found another canine to mess around with. Eventually, the wolf stopped. It stood there for a while, watching the husky, who was still wagging his tail and bouncing around. Then the wolf turned and trotted off into the woods, disappearing just as quietly as it had come. Dave said he didn't sleep the rest of the night. Not because of fear exactly, though some of it was, but because he was so confused, so stunned by what he'd just seen. He checked the whole campsite, looked for signs of more wolves, packed the food tighter, moved it all into a bear bag, and hung it up from tree, just to be safe. The only things missing were a few pieces of jerky and the dog food he'd left in a plastic container outside the tent. It had been knocked over and chewed open. That was the only real damage, well, that and the tear in the tent. He showed it to us later. It looked like a clean slice, as if the wolf had used its teeth and paws to dig in, just enough to stick its head through. Nothing else had been disturbed. Nothing else had even been touched. It's funny. He said it was one of the most incredible things he'd ever experienced. He wasn't angry. He didn't blame the wolf. But he also told us, clear as day, that he'd never keep food in his tent again. Not ever. It had been laziness, he admitted. He thought, because he had a dog with him, nothing would get too close. He figured the dog would bark, scare things off. But the truth is, his dog had probably drawn the wolf in. And if that wolf hadn't been in a playful mood, things could have gone very differently. We stayed another 2 nights, and so did Dave. Nothing else strange happened, but that story stuck with me. Not because it was terrifying, but because it was so unexpected. Out there in the wild, anything can happen. And sometimes, even the scariest moments don't end the way you think they will. Sometimes it's not a fight. It's just a strange, quiet meeting between 2 animals that could have been enemies, but weren't. Still, every time I pack for a trip now, I think about that night. About how close danger can come without a sound. I double-check my food storage. I zip my tent all the way. And I always remember, just because something can happen doesn't mean it will, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be ready. I booked an Airbnb in a small mountain town in West Virginia because it was the only place I could find that fit my budget and had good reviews. I'd been laid off 2 months earlier and needed to get away for a while. I thought maybe a quiet place would help me get my head straight. The town was called Cold Pines, population just under 500. I never heard of it before. When I looked it up, the search results were sparse. Some pictures of woods and an old general store, but the house looked clean and cozy in the photos. Simple two-story place, wood paneling, a gravel driveway, and surrounded by trees. I booked it for 2 weeks. The drive-in was already off. My GPS cut out about 10 miles before I got there, and I had to rely on vague screenshots of directions. I passed only 2 other cars on the way in. The trees got thicker, like they were leaning over the road, and the last stretch was just gravel. The town center was tiny, a single road, a gas station, and a diner with a flickering neon open sign that buzzed even through my closed window. When I pulled up to the house, it looked more worn than the photos. The paint was faded, and the porch steps had a soft give under my weight. Still, it was clean inside, smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood. There was a binder on the kitchen counter labeled House Info with Wi-Fi details and emergency numbers, but there was no signal. I figured it was just the area. The first few days were normal. I slept in, drank instant coffee on the porch, and walked into town once or twice. The town was weird though. People didn't really talk. When I walked past someone, they either looked away or stared too long. No one greeted me. I went into the diner once and felt like I'd walked into a private conversation that had just stopped. The waitress didn't smile. I ordered eggs and toast. They were cold when they came. The Airbnb didn't have a TV, which I knew going in, so I mostly read. But at night, the woods around the house got loud. Not like coyotes or bugs. It sounded like someone moving through them. On the 3rd night, around midnight, I heard what I thought were footsteps on gravel. I was upstairs reading. I froze and listened. Slow, deliberate steps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They stopped near the side of the house. I turned off the light and waited. After a minute or 2, I peeked out the upstairs window. Nothing, just black trees and a patch of the driveway lit up by the porch light. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the sound had been too steady, too paced. The next morning, I checked the gravel, and there were marks. Could have been boot prints, could have been nothing. I didn't have a nerve to ask anyone in town about it. That night, I locked all the windows and double-checked the doors. Around 2 a.m., I heard something again. This time it was a thud, like something heavy hitting the back of the house. I sat up in bed, heart going crazy, and listened. Another thud, then silence. I didn't sleep until the sun came up. When I went outside later, there were scratches on the back wall. Deep, long ones, like someone had dragged a stick or a knife along the wood. I should have left, but I didn't. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. I even tried to laugh it off. Told myself it was probably just some local kids messing with me. But things kept happening. I leave a light on in the kitchen and find it off in the morning. One day, I came back from a walk and the front door was open just slightly. I knew I'd locked it. The next night, something tapped on the upstairs window around 3 a.m. Just 2 quick taps, like fingernails. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. Just stayed under the covers with my eyes wide open until morning. By the end of the first week, I started keeping a knife on the nightstand. I tried to leave then. I packed my bag and drove back down the gravel road. When I got to the town's only gas station, I pulled over to top off the tank. The pump didn't work. I went inside, but no one was there. The lights were on, the door was unlocked, but the place was empty. I walked through the whole store. It felt wrong. I didn't take anything, just left. I kept driving. I should have reached the main road in 15 minutes, but I didn't. I drove for 30, then 40. Nothing but trees and gravel. Eventually, I circled back to the town. I knew I'd taken the right turns. I followed the same route out. I even passed the same downed tree branch twice. I parked outside the house and just sat in the car. I didn't want to go back inside. I thought about sleeping in the car, but it didn't feel safe. Eventually, I forced myself back into the house and locked everything again. I stayed inside next day. I kept the knife with me everywhere. I didn't eat much. I didn't shower. I just watched from the windows. At one point, I saw someone walking between the trees. A man, I think, just standing still, then disappearing behind a trunk. I never saw him come out the other side. I took every curtain down that night, so I could see out from every angle. The last night I was there, I slept on the couch in the living room. The upstairs just felt wrong. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the front doorknob turning. Slow. Testing. I didn't move. I held my breath and waited. Then I heard the soft scrape of something sliding across the floorboards of the porch. Then nothing. In the morning, I found a dead rabbit on the porch. Its neck was broken. No blood. Just placed there like an offering. I didn't unpack anything. I threw my bag into the trunk and drove again. This time, I went in the opposite direction from the day before. No GPS, no maps, just a guess. I drove until I ran out of gravel and hit cracked pavement. I didn't stop, even when I hit a pothole, so hard my front tire bent. Eventually, I found a highway and flagged down a truck. I told the driver I'd gotten lost hiking. I didn't tell him about the house or the town. I just wanted out. Later, I tried to look up coal pines again. Nothing came up, not even on satellite maps. The listing was gone. My reservation history just said, location unavailable. The photos I'd saved from the Airbnb app were gone too. Blank gray squares. I've tried to explain it to myself 100 times. I've told myself maybe it was some messed up community that liked to screw with outsiders. Maybe they were all in on it. Maybe I imagined parts of it because I was already stressed out. But I can't explain how I ended up back in the town after driving in a straight line, or why no records of it exist anymore. I still think about that house sometimes, about the silence in the town, about the rabbit. I've moved since then. I live in a city now. Lots of people, lots of lights. I never book Airbnbs anymore, not even for a weekend. I don't trust quiet places. I don't trust small towns. And I don't trust being alone in the woods. Because I've learned that when something feels wrong, it usually is. You just have to be smart enough to leave before it's too late. It was the middle of July when we made the climb. Me and two buddies just chasing that strange mix of silence and adrenaline you only find in places people don't usually go. The trail up had been brutal, barely even a trail after a while. There were no markers, no other hikers, nothing but endless gray rock and small patches of stubborn mountain grass. We were high up, higher than I'd ever camped before. Our legs burned all day, and the air got thinner with every step, but we had one thing pushing us, that glacier. That giant wall of blue ice sitting at the top of the ridge, like a frozen ocean frozen in mid-crash. When we reached it, it didn't even feel real. The thing was massive, stretching like a frozen cliff along the backside of the mountain bowl we'd come up through. The air was quiet, dead quiet, like the mountain was holding its breath. We set up camp a few hundred feet from it, just far enough away that we could still feel the cold air bleeding off it, but not close enough to get hit with any sudden wind bursts. It was strange how much colder it felt just being near it, like standing in front of a freezer with the door wide open. We brought a basic 3-person tent, compact and easy to carry, and we used the surrounding rocks to build a small half wall around it to block some of the air. It wasn't much, maybe 2 feet high, but it made a difference. We cooked near the edge of our little wall, the stove flame flickering in the wind, even with a windscreen around it. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I remember how the only real sound came from the occasional creaking or cracking from the glacier itself. The sound would echo strangely through the bowl, low and deep, like the mountain shifting in its sleep. That evening, we sat on our foam pads and watched a pair of mountaineers start their climb up the glacier. Tiny figures against the towering blue wall, tied together with a rope and moving in small, careful steps. It looked slow, cold, and dangerous, but beautiful. The kind of thing you know you'll never do, but feel lucky just to witness. As the sun set, the glacier glowed faintly blue. It was the kind of view that burned into your memory, the kind you think about when you're stuck behind a desk or lying in bed unable to sleep. We slept hard that night, wrapped tight in our bags, the cold creeping in despite all our layers. The wind stayed low, and aside from a few distant pops from the ice, it was a still night. Morning came with bright sun, clear skies, and the sound of runoff. Meltwater trickling down into little temporary streams all around us. You could hear it beneath the rocks, beneath the ice. It sounded alive. After a quick breakfast of granola bars and whatever was left of our instant coffee, We packed a small day bag and headed off to check out a waterfall we'd seen from the ridge on our way up. It wasn't marked on any map we had, just a silver line in the distance that we figured was worth checking out. The walk wasn't far, maybe an hour or so over uneven rock and across some light snow patches that hadn't melted yet. The air was crisp and dry, and the sun made it feel warmer than it really was. The waterfall was better than we'd hoped, pouring out of the side of the cliff and splashing down into a series of bright, cold pools. It looked untouched, clean, untouched by humans. We sat there for a while, shoes off, soaking our feet and letting the cold water numb the aches. We took a few photos, just the kind you take without thinking too much about, assuming they'll never do the place justice anyway. We stayed out there for a few hours, lost in that strange high-altitude calm. No reception, no noises beyond what nature decided to give us, and nothing in the world to worry about. When we headed back, the sun had shifted westward and shadows had started stretching across the rocks. It felt a little cooler, but nothing alarming. We talked about heating up some soup, maybe staying another night before heading back down. We hadn't seen a single soul besides the 2 climbers since we got up there. But when we crested the last rise back into our camp bowl, something was wrong. Off. The rocks looked out of place, scattered. Our tent wasn't there. At first, it didn't register. We just stood there, staring down, trying to make sense of it. Then it hit. Our tent was gone. Not collapsed. Not dragged by the wind. Gone. In its place was a mess of rocks, torn fabric, and what looked like a mini landslide. Huge chunks of ice sat where our tent had been, surrounded by smaller bits of broken glacier and sharp, angular stones. One of our foam pads was shredded and half buried under gravel. Our stove, that heavy steel stove, was bent and partially buried. One of our backpacks was wedged in between 2 boulders like a toy. We didn't speak. We just stood there and stared. It didn't take long to figure out what happened. A piece of the glacier, a massive one, probably the size of a small car or bigger, had broken off and tumbled down. It must have hit loose rock and triggered a mini slide, dragging everything in its path. Our tent was right in the way. Everything we had was there, or what was left of it. Our sleeping bags were torn open, covered in dirt and ice. Our food bag had been flattened completely. One of the tent poles had pierced straight into the ground like a spear. We walked around, slowly, checking the damage. I remember my hands were shaking. Not from the cold, not entirely. Just the realization that if we hadn't gone to see that waterfall, if we'd stayed to rest or nap or even been running a bit behind, we would have been right there when it hit. No question, it wasn't just rocks. That ice had weight and speed and force. It wouldn't have been a question of injuries. It would have been instant. We'd be buried under 30 tons of ice and stone, and no one would have known for days. Maybe weeks. No one knew we were up here. We didn't have time to panic. We had to act. We dug out what we could, salvaged 1 pack with the emergency radio and enough supplies to hike back down. The other gear was either crushed or buried. We didn't even try to sleep there again. We made a decision in less than 5 minutes. Grab what you can and move. Get down. Now. The descent was brutal. We had to move fast, but careful, with tired legs and heavy minds. Every sound from the glacier behind us made us flinch. Every gust of wind felt like another warning. We camped far lower that night, in a sheltered forest clearing, barely able to eat or talk. I remember lying awake, not from fear anymore, but from realization. That thin, sharp line between being alive and not. We had crossed it without even knowing. We made it out the next day, limping and dirty but whole. When we reached the base trailhead, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. I still think about that day, about how close it was. People talk about near-death experiences like dramatic movie scenes, but this wasn't like that. It was quiet, cold, slow. It didn't even look dangerous until after it had already passed. Nature doesn't warn you. It just happens. We never went back to that glacier. I don't think we ever will. It was the second night of our camping trip, and I was 13 at the time. We were staying in a bush area. Nothing fancy, just me, a couple of family members, and a friend or 2. We had set up close to a creek, surrounded by thick trees and dry scrub. The adults were in their tents, but I decided to sleep outside on a tarp. It made me feel tougher, like I was doing something more real. No tent walls, just me and the stars. The air was crisp and still, the kind of night where everything sounds louder than it should. Crickets chirped somewhere in the distance, and every once in a while a gum tree would creak as it shifted with the breeze. I was curled up in my sleeping bag with my backpack stuffed under my head as a pillow. It wasn't comfortable, not really, but it felt better than nothing. I had my hoodie pulled tight, only my nose sticking out, just listening to the quiet hum of the bush and trying to fall asleep. I was just starting to drift off when I heard something. A noise to the left. It wasn't loud, just a soft rustling, but it was sharp enough to snap me fully awake. My eyes flew open. I stayed completely still, heart already picking up speed. It was the kind of noise that didn't match the wind or normal animal sounds. It sounded like something moving through the dry leaves, like something deliberate. Another rustle, then the sound of branches shifting. Something, or someone, was walking through the bush nearby. I sat up too fast, and my sleeping bag twisted around me. I fought it off and looked toward the sound, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. There was no moon, just a faint glow from the stars above, and the trees blocked most of that anyway. Everything out past the immediate area was just shifting shadows. The noise kept coming, leaves crunching, bushes rustling. It wasn't heavy, but it wasn't small either. Bigger than a possum, maybe even as big as a dog. I strained my ears, holding my breath, hoping it would just stop, but it didn't. I looked around for something, anything to defend myself with. There was nothing. No stick, no rock, no flashlight. My stomach turned, and I had this sudden panicky thought that maybe this was how people got killed in the middle of nowhere. Sleeping on the ground like idiots while something stalked them from the trees. I ducked back into my sleeping bag and pulled it over my head, breathing as quietly as I could. I felt like a coward, but there was no part of me that wanted to get up and go see what it was. Every horror story I'd ever heard, every dumb movie where someone says, "I'll check it out," and never comes back, it all flashed through my head. No way. I was not doing that. The rustling got closer. It circled a little to the side, then stopped completely. Just silence. For a few seconds I thought maybe it had gone, but then something tugged at my head. My pillow shifted. My bag. I thought maybe I'd moved it by accident, but then it tugged again. Slowly, carefully. Not like someone yanking it. More like something dragging it, inch by inch. I stayed frozen. I didn't even breathe. Then the bag was gone. I heard it slide over the tarp and hit the ground beside me. Something was dragging it into the bushes. The same rustling started up again, now heading away from me. That's when my brain fully broke. My whole body tensed up, and all I could think was that someone had come into our camp and was stealing things, or worse, setting me up for something awful. I started imagining a man with a knife hiding in the dark, or some animal ready to jump me. I was too afraid to scream, too afraid to move. I just lay there in my bag, heart slamming, breath shaking. Then I had this insane idea. I thought, what if I scare them first? I remembered some random advice I'd read online once about scaring away wild animals or people. Make noise, pretend to be something bigger, meaner. In my head, barking like a dog seemed like a good idea at the time. I figured if it was a person, they'd think I had a dog. If it was an animal, maybe it would get confused and run off. So I did it. Still wrapped in my sleeping bag like an idiot burrito, I sat up halfway and just started barking. Loud. Panicked. Not even trying to sound like a real dog, just barking. Like a lunatic. And then I stood up, still barking, hoping to look big and scary even though I probably looked like some sleep-deprived weirdo flailing around. The rustling stopped. I stood there frozen, squinting into the trees, my sleeping bag around my knees and bare feet on the tarp. And then I saw it. A small, round shape waddled out from the edge of the bushes. It was low to the ground, chunky, with thick legs and tiny eyes that caught the starlight for a second. It looked up at me. Not afraid, not impressed, just staring. It had my bag in its mouth. A wombat. A goddamn wombat. It just stood there for a second, then dropped the bag, sniffed it, and turned around like nothing had happened. No panic, no fear, just casually waddling back into the bush like it had done nothing wrong. The rustling faded with it as it disappeared into the undergrowth. I just stood there in the cold, still half tangled in my bag, watching the spot where it had vanished. My heart was still hammering. I felt dizzy and stupid. The whole time I'd been shaking with fear, thinking it was a killer or some wild animal trying to get at me. It had just been a wombat. I walked over and grabbed my bag. It was a bit wet and covered in dirt, but everything inside seemed fine. I wiped it off the best I could and crawled back into my sleeping bag. I didn't sleep well after that. Every sound after that made me twitch. Every time a twig snapped or the wind shifted the leaves, I'd freeze and wait for another visit. But nothing else came. No more rustling, no more stolen bags. Just me, lying there in the dark, feeling dumb, but still kind of wired from how scared I'd been. Looking back now, it's hilarious. A wombat. But that night, at 13 years old, it was terrifying. It felt real. The fear wasn't just in my head, it was in my whole body. It didn't matter that it turned out to be nothing. In the moment, it was everything. That fear, that panic, it stayed with me. Even now, whenever someone suggests sleeping outside without a tent, I think about that night. I remember the feeling of that bag slipping away and the silence that followed. And then I remember barking like a dog at a wombat. Yeah, never again. We were about 6 of us, old friends from college, and had planned a 3-day camping trip near Lake Erie on the Canadian side. It was early summer, warm enough to enjoy the outdoors, but still cool at night. We'd picked a remote patch of land up on a slight rise that overlooked the lake. Nothing too dramatic, not a mountain or anything, but enough of a slope that you could see out across the water and down the shore for a good distance. The spot was dry, rugged, not maintained. No outhouses, no picnic tables, just a few trees, hard-packed dirt, and a lake below. We arrived around noon on the first day, parked a couple of cars about half a kilometer back on a wide gravel shoulder, then hiked our gear in. It wasn't a marked campground, just a known patch of wilderness where people sometimes stayed. The hiking wasn't bad. You had to push through some brush, and it was steep in a few spots, but nothing crazy. We set up camp just above the slope that led down to the lake. The view was great. Clear blue water, the sound of waves lapping against the rocky shore, and no other people anywhere nearby. That first day went smoothly. We pitched 3 tents, gathered some dry wood for a fire, and spent the afternoon drinking beer, skipping stones, and bullshitting. That night, we cooked hot dogs over the fire, shared stories, and passed around a flask of whiskey until the stars came out. We went to bed late, heads full of smoke and laughter, and everyone crashed hard. The second day started lazy. I got up just after sunrise to piss and caught a quiet breeze coming off the lake. I sat on a rock with a granola bar and watched the water glint. The others stirred a little later. We made instant coffee, fried some eggs and bacon on a portable burner, and planned to head down to the lake for a swim after it warmed up. It was sometime around late afternoon when my buddy Kyle started complaining about his stomach. He was pacing a little, holding his gut, said he felt bloated and crampy. We figured it was something he ate, maybe the sausage from breakfast, or maybe the beer mixing badly. At first he just groaned and joked about it, but pretty soon he was doubled over and sweating. It got intense fast. Eventually, he just grabbed a roll of toilet paper, didn't say anything, and made his way down the path toward the lake. The rest of us were up by the fire, half watching, half laughing at the way he was waddling like he couldn't quite keep it all in. It wasn't funny to him, obviously, but the rest of us were still in that light camp mood, where everything feels silly. He made it down the slope to a flatter area right at the lake's edge. It was maybe 10 or 12 feet below where we sat, a mix of smooth rocks and sand with the water lapping just a few feet beyond. We tried to give him space, but honestly, we were kind of watching just because it was hard not to. A few minutes later, we saw him shuffling into the water, pants off, trying to clean himself off. It wasn't deep. He was standing in maybe 3 feet of water, about waist high. He bent down, splashing water over himself, and that's when it happened. 1 second, he was there, standing in the shallows, his back to us, and then he wasn't. It was like watching someone drop straight through a trapdoor. There was no splash, no flailing, just a sudden drop. 1 second he was upright, the next he was gone under the surface. At first we all just froze. It didn't make sense. The water was shallow. Maybe he slipped. Maybe he ducked down for a laugh. But it was weird. Too fast. Too smooth. No sound except the usual lapping of water. We waited, thinking he'd pop back up, grinning, trying to scare us. But nothing. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Then a full minute. That's when a mood broke, and we all stood up. A few of us started running down the slope toward the lake. My heart was pounding by the time I got close. Just as I reached the edge, there was this sudden thrashing in the water. It was violent. Kyle shot up out of the lake like a man being launched, screaming at the top of his lungs, stumbling, coughing, flailing wildly. He bolted toward the shore like something was still chasing him. His arms were covered in scratches, and his face was twisted with raw panic. He didn't stop until he was well out of the water, up on the rocks, bent over, gasping for air. We circled him, trying to figure out what had just happened, but he was shaking, wide-eyed, and couldn't talk right away. Eventually, through short bursts, he told us what he remembered. He said he felt something wrap around his ankle, hard like fingers or claws. He didn't know. It yanked him under so fast he couldn't get a breath. He said it dragged him not down but out, further into the lake. He fought it, kicked and clawed. He said it felt like it was pulling him toward the deeper part, the drop-off just a few meters out. He didn't remember surfacing. He just kept struggling until suddenly he broke free or it let go. We looked at where he'd gone under and where he popped up. It didn't match. He'd surfaced at least 10 meters from where we'd last seen him. In shallow water like that, it didn't make sense. He couldn't have swum that far under the surface in that time. And even if he had, the dragging part still didn't add up. We walked the shore for an hour, poking around, trying to see if maybe there was something, a hole, a current, maybe a sudden shelf drop-off we hadn't seen before. But the lake floor, there was smooth rock and packed sand. Nothing deep, nothing dangerous. No logs, no sharp drops, no underwater weeds thick enough to tangle. Just 3 feet of clear water and a gradual slope. After a while, we gave up. Kyle stayed wrapped in a sleeping bag the rest of the day, refusing to go anywhere near the water. That night, none of us spoke much. We didn't make a fire. We stayed in our tents, zipped up tight, just listening to the wind moving through the trees and the distant sound of the waves hitting the shore. The third day, we packed up early. No one said it directly, but the fun was over. It wasn't that anyone thought Kyle was lying. His panic was real. He wasn't the type to make up shit for attention. And he hadn't had anything to drink that day. None of us had. It was supposed to be a dry trip, no drugs, just clean camping. We'd agreed to it before going. Even now, years later, when we talk about that trip, that moment always gets quiet. Kyle still swears something grabbed him. Not a fish, not a cramp. He says he felt fingers like a hand, tight and pulling. He never went back to that lake. None of us did. It could have been a freak thing, a whirlpool, an underwater current, some natural force we didn't understand. Maybe he panicked and it just felt like something was grabbing him. Maybe the shock of the cold, his body reacting to the cramps, sent him into a spiral. We tried to explain it a dozen different ways, but none of them really fit. All I know is that I saw my friend disappear in 3 feet of calm water like he'd been yanked by something invisible, and he came out of that lake looking more scared than I've ever seen anyone in my life. Something happened out there. I don't know what, but it was real.